Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Kakashi Before Academy. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 9. Genin Days. Team 1. Miss Suzume's voice pierced through the silent veil that had settled around the unusually noiseless classroom. This place had never been so quiet with this many students in it before, always having at least a kid or two talking or whispering to each other. But today was a special day. For many aspiring shinobi, years and years of studies and training had led them to this point. This was the culmination of all of their efforts. Every single person within the room were giving their teacher their undivided attention. Ryu Kusada, Hachi Nanaimo, Miko Tanaka. Your sensei will be Genma Shiranui. Our favorite Jinchuriki really wanted to have Kakashi as his teacher. Unfortunately, Kakashi was still needed right now and could not take in a fully fledged team yet. While not as bad as several years ago, Konoha had not quite completely recovered from Kyuubi's attack. They still had a shortage of shinobi at their disposition, making Kakashi have to work extra hard due to his high mission success rate. Speaking of Kyuubi, Naruto had told him what he'd found out about the Shinigami and the mask, and how it was missing. Needless to say, Kyuubi was more than a little annoyed. The great beast had deduced that whoever had ripped out the pages of the book was the same person that had run off with the mask. That made his plans a bit harder than he'd first anticipated. Another thing that had surprised him was the amount of information within the book. Such a powerful and dangerous Uzumaki clan secret should not be in a public library, even if it was restricted to Jonins only. What was it even doing in Konoha anyway? Now that he thought about it, when Uzu had been destroyed, anything that was salvageable had probably been brought back to Konoha, since they were their only allied shinobi village. And he guessed that from there, it was kept somewhere safe. But now, with no mask, half of the pages missing from the book and a third of the pages being unreadable, it's not like anyone could really do anything with it. But still, Team 4, Nakamura Kita, Shibuya Sari, Tanaka Jin. Your sensei will be Yamashiro Aoba. Ah, damn it. He'd been so preoccupied with his train of thought that he spaced out and missed several of the formed team. His eyes met the ones of the student named Kita, a boy that had just been placed onto Team 4. He recognized him. The memory was faint since it was so long ago and he was very young at the time, but this was definitely one of the kids that used to torment him back at the orphanage. The apprehensive side look that the older boy was giving him spoke more than words ever could. He recognized him as well and it made him nervous. He'd probably seen his fighting display from yesterday and worried that he'd seek revenge against his for his mistreatment. A part of him enjoyed that feeling. Team 5, Soryu Yuna, Ito Sho, Uzumaki Naruto. Your teacher will be Wada Tomoda. So that was his team. He glanced next to him at his would-be teammate, Yuna. She looked neither happy nor unhappy, with her arm crossed and an eyebrow raised in mild curiosity. Several minutes went by as Suzume finished reading off the new teams. Most of the students had moved to sit in groups with their new teammates, though Naruto and Yuna chose to remain in their seats since they were already on the same team. Are you two Naruto and Yuna? Both turned their heads towards another boy from their classroom. He was pretty tall for his age, standing at 5 feet 7 when only being 13 years old. He had short spiky hair that was buzzed short on the sides, gray eyes and pretty muscular arms. His hair was some type of dark gray charcoal color and his black eyes held this serious stoic look that he'd sometimes see in civilian soldiers. If Naruto had met him anywhere else but within the classroom, he would have thought him to be at least 15 or 16. What's it to you? Snapped back Yuna with a mild frown. If the charcoal-haired boy was offended by her tone, then he did a good job hiding it. I'm your teammate, Sho Ito. Nice to meet you, he said in a cordial voice. Naruto offered him a small smile as he stood up to let Sho sit in between him and Yuna. I'm Naruto. I hope we get along. Sho nodded and sat down in the offered seat as Naruto took his place next to him. Yuna eyed the newcomer before looking back out the window in disinterest, and the trio soon descended into an uncomfortable silence for the next half an hour. Well, that was a great start. Team 5 inches, a man with light brown hair and very small yellow pupils, called out, drawing the three students' attention. Giving them a small smile, Tomoda gestured towards outside of the academy gates. I'm Wada Tomoda. Let's gather up at Training Ground 5 and introduce ourselves there. The three looked amongst each other skeptically before standing up and following after the man. It only took them a few minutes to arrive to Training Ground 5. This field was right next to Training Ground 4, which was where Naruto had been training for the last 6 months. He absently noted that this place looked a lot drier than the one before it. Contrary to number 4, the greenery of number 5 had been mostly uprooted, leaving dry earth and dead grass behind instead. Now then, began Tomoda as he idly twirled a stick he'd found on the ground between his fingers. Tell me about yourselves. By all means, don't all speak up at once, said the teacher after a few seconds of silence. What should we say, sensei? Queried Naruto. His two teammates remained silent, though both looked as equally perplexed. You know, the general stuff. Names, likes, dislikes, dreams. Shouldn't you go first then? Said Yuna in a deadpan tone. We already know each other. The Jonin instructor rubbed his chin in thought before sighing. Fine. The three youths looked at their teacher expectantly as he cleared his throat. The name is Tomoda. I'm 24. I like practicing Kaden jutsus and playing poker. I dislike water users. At that he used his hand to cover the side of his mouth and continued in a playful hushed tone. They never go with the flow of my fire attacks. Crickets chirped as the three children stared at their teacher in varying degrees of bewilderment. Yuna seemed irritated. Sho's face remained unchanged. Naruto just looked confused. Man, tough crowd. Tomoda awkwardly coughed into his fist but kept going. Anyway, my pastimes are hanging out with my friends and training. My dream for the future is to be able to settle down and have my own family. He finished with a smile. Your turn, Miss Sunshine and Rainbow. The teacher said as he pointed at Yuna. Yuna crossed her arms but obliged nonetheless. Name's Soryu Yuna. I'm 12. I like my aunt and napping. I don't like people who talk too much and can't take care of themselves. My pastimes are reading and training. My dream is to one day be able to write my own book. Tomoda nodded and turned his eyes towards Sho. Your turn. Sho nodded and straightened his posture. My name is Ito Sho. My likes are strength and my training. I dislike weakness more than anything. Sho's eyes hardened with conviction. Strength is absolute. All is meaningless without victory. To be defeated is to lose everything. That statement drew stares from his two teammates and a pensive look from his teacher. What an interesting guy. My goal is to become the strongest. Their teacher offered him a small smile. A fine goal, Sho. He said, making the boy nod in thanks. Diverting his attention to their last and youngest member, Tomoda shot him an encouraging grin. Your turn now, Blondie. Right, said Naruto as he steeled his nerves. Being the center of attention was making him nervous. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like playing pranks and ramen. Oh, and also the color orange. He tapped a finger to his chin in thought. There's not much I really dislike except for being alone and eating vegetables. If I had to pick though, I'd say being alone. My pastimes are mainly just training and pulling pranks. As for my dream. He trailed off at that. What was his dream? He wanted to free Kyuubi and the tailed beasts. He wanted to help the other Jinchurikis. He wanted the constant violence and hatred to stop. He wanted peace, even though he knew just how unachievable that was. He wanted people to not be killed in the street just for being a foreign ninja. He wanted people to be able to live without fearing that any day could be their last. My dream is to unite the world. That drew surprised looks from everyone. 8-year-olds usually didn't have such ambitious goals. They usually were along the lines of, I wanna be a cool ninja, or, I wanna be Hokage. But uniting the world is something that grown shinobi sought after having been on the battlefield and witnessing violence and prejudice on a daily basis. Out of all people to follow up, it was surprisingly Yuna that was first to speak her mind. How would you even plan to do that? She said with a frown. Shinobi countries have been hating each other for centuries. Unfortunately, the blonde didn't have an answer for that yet. I've got no idea. Well, now that introductions are over, said Tomoda after a few minutes had gone by, it's about time we got started on your genin test. Test, said Yuna incredulously. We already had one. Sho nodded in agreement. That's right. We were told that once we received those headbands, we would officially become shinobi. Tomoda just gave them a small smirk that put Naruto on edge. Ah, That's where you're mistaken. That test you took was the academy test to weed out the people that weren't even worthy of being considered. If you can't even do a bunch of D-rank jutsu, then what hope would you have against a real enemy? That did make a lot of sense now that the blonde thought about it. That exam had been way too easy. So that academy test was. That's right, think of it as a preliminary test. This here's the real deal. The teacher was a bit too jovial about this for the genin's taste. So, what's the test? At that, Tomoda gave them a cheeky smile. Setting down a timer on the ground a few meters away, he used the branch that he'd been fiddling with to draw a circle around him that was roughly a meter in diameter. You need to make me step out of this circle. You can use any tools or techniques, or any underhanded method for that matter. You gotta come at me with the intent to kill. You have 30 minutes. Oh, and whoever doesn't manage to make me move will go back to the academy. All was quiet in the clearing as the three children stared at their teacher incredulously. You can't be serious, sensei, said Yuna in a miffed tone. I am dead serious. He brought his hand forward and made a come at me motion. Just what the hell were those genin? Tomoda was by no means a weakling. In fact, if he had to evaluate himself, he'd say that he was about mid-jonin level. But these three kids. Sho had this freakish earth ability where he used earth style to harden his skin, making it become noticeably darker. That was definitely the earth style. Earth skin, also known as iron skin. And last he heard, that was a technique that was usually seen being used by a certain super-powered missing nin from Tokigakure. It wasn't too far-fetched to imagine that someone had seen that move and replicated it, but still, fresh genin should not know these types of jutsu yet. But that was okay, he was after all just a genin. While his strength was nothing to scoff at, he could easily take it and retaliate. Him being so young made him inexperienced and uncoordinated with Yuna's genjutsus that she would throw at him, which was easily shown when he flared his chakra to break her illusion and block a strong punch that was aimed at his face. That blonde kid though, what the hell was he? He was the youngest out of all of them, yet easily the most dangerous. He should be in the playgrounds with friends, playing tag and crying over a scraped knee. But here he was, being the most problematic out of the trio. He was throwing out these weird chains and those wind jutsu like it was nothing. And as if that wasn't enough, the little devil was quick. A soft rustling made the jonin jump up in reflex, narrowly avoiding a golden chain that had shot out from beneath him and attempted to wrap around his leg. Taking out a kunai, Tomoda used the flat side to bat away a second chain on its way to spear through his shoulder. These are kinda dangerous, were the nervous thoughts of the brunette. Sho cracked his neck and rushed in close to Tomoda once more, bringing up two earth-coated arms to block his teacher's kick and skidding backwards a few feet. This isn't going anywhere, thought Yuna to herself in frustration. While Sho and Naruto were both surprisingly strong, they were up against a jonin. Everything that they threw at him was easily countered and returned. And with the additional threat of being sent back to the academy, they were all competing to be the one to stay. What the hell kind of rule is that anyway? She complained as she threw another kunai at the teacher while he wasn't looking. Unfortunately, that too was caught and thrown back at her. It's like he was trying to pit them all against each other. What genin team has only one member in it? Yuna suddenly skidded to a halt. Actually, she's never seen a one-man team before. Konoha was all about the will of fire, and having each other's back. That's it, she said to herself, drawing the attention of the blonde child next to her. What's wa ga? Yuna grabbed onto his wrist and began to run in the opposite direction, looking back at her second teammate. Sho, over here. Sho glanced behind and, after blocking yet another kick from his teacher, retreated to a safe distance before following after his two teammates. Tomoda sighed slightly and dusted his arms free of the dirt that had gathered onto his sleeves. Wonder where they're going. Hey, what gives? Complained Naruto as he pulled his arm free from the brunette's hold. Sho frowned and crossed his arms. What did you want? If you haven't noticed, we're running out of time. Just listen. She snapped back. When's the last time you've seen a genin team with only one genin? It's never happened before. The Earth user raised an eyebrow. Your point being, Konoha is all about teamwork, right? Why would he be the one to make the only one-man team? Oh, said Naruto in realization. He's turning us against each other. Yuna nodded at him, but Sho looked unconvinced. Why would he do that? Yuna shrugged. Don't know. Making us see the bigger picture, probably. But right now, we need a plan. Man, this is boring, complained the sensei to himself as he kept fiddling with the stick in his hand. He'd been sitting here for the past 10 minutes and time was beginning to run out. I'd give anything for this boredom to go away. Even an invasion wouldn't be so bad right about now. Glancing over to the clock, he saw that there was about 5 minutes left before time would run out. Did they give up? I wonder if I made the test too Hey, ugly. Tomoda looked behind him and saw the youngest in his team pulling onto his eyelid mockingly with his tongue out. Why do you like that stick so much? Did your mom get it on with a dog? Why you? A vein throbbed angrily on Tomoda's forehead. What's wrong, dog man? You got some ticks under your collar. You little brat, screamed the teacher. Come over here and say that to my face. Tomoda suddenly felt a slight wave of dizziness as the shadows in the terrain began to merge together, causing him to immediately put his guard up. A genjutsu. Making the ram seal, he flexed his chakra and broke the illusion, quickly dodging out of the way of 2 Naruto clones charging at him and easily dispelling them with his kunai. A diversion, huh? I gotta admit, that was pretty well thought out. But it's not enough. The teacher suddenly lurched back as Sho seemed to appear out of thin air and delivered a strong right hook to his face, making him stumble. Unfortunately, he quickly recovered and hopped over the following leg sweep, using a fireball jutsu to chase him away. A double-layered genjutsu. Now Tomoda really was on guard. His eyes landed on the only female of the team who was holding her hands in a seal in concentration. Her chakra control must be exceptionally good to be able to pull that off. His train of thought was cut short when the little terror that was the Jinchuriki engaged him once more, and Tomoda was back to dodging wind attacks and a fast pair of fists. Yuna's eyes met Sho's, who nodded in return. The tallest of the students soon joined the fray, making the teacher have to focus his attention on the second person and step up his game even more. The girl put her fingers in the horse hand seal, but before she could do anything further, the loud ringing of a clock drew the attention of everyone in the training ground. Phew, you guys are relentless, complained Tomoda as he wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. A bit longer and you would probably have gotten me. But you didn't manage to force me out of the boundaries. His eyes turned serious as he stepped out and picked up the clock. You fail. Instead of being met with dissatisfied looks like he was expecting, he was instead met with the cross-armed confident look of Sho and the satisfied smirk of Naruto, who rubbed his finger on the bridge of his nose. Actually, sensei, you're the one that failed. Tomoda raised an eyebrow at that. What are you talking about? The clock sprang to life once more, making the teacher flinch back and look at the clock in surprise. What the hell was going on? The clock had already rung. Yuna came up with the plan. It was super smart. Crowed Naruto in appraisal, making the girl huff and stuff her hands in her pockets. While I was distracting and angering you, Yuna put you under a genjutsu. That made you think that I was attacking you, when in fact it was Sho that was coming at you from behind. Sho continued. When your attention had been diverted to me and your full concentration was off Yuna and the clock, she placed you under a third genjutsu that made you believe the timer had gone off. The fire user looked down at the clock in his hands, then at the lines on the ground behind him. They'd tricked him. They hadn't forced him out of the boundaries, they made him willingly walk out. Those guys are something else. He smiled in defeat and rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Can't believe I got. You played me like a fiddle. Sighing, he continued. This test wasn't just to see if you could make me come out of the boundaries, it was also to see if you had what it took to fight as a team. He said in a solemn voice. But you guys know this already, don't you? That question was a moot point. They'd executed their plans perfectly. Yuna had rounded up the team, come up with the plan and provided long-distance support. Naruto was the diversion, and Sho had been the heavy hitter. You guys, pass. Welcome to Team 5. This was usually the time when the gathered genin would whoop for joy and high-five, congratulate each other, celebrate, anything. However, the silent stoicism of Sho, the cool indifference of Yuna and the introverted nature of Naruto told him that this team still had a long way to go. But if the small satisfied look they were giving each other were any indication, then it wasn't a completely lost cause. You've gotta be kidding me. Becoming a shinobi had been a major step forward to achieving his goal, finding the mask and helping the Jinchurikis. When he was training with Kakashi, he'd thought that becoming a ninja would finally let him get away from Konoha, explore the world, visit other nations, see what was beyond the massive forests that surrounded the Leaf Village. He'd always been an optimistic. At least, he tried to be. It did get hard sometimes. The constant isolation and mistreatment had occasionally made him think very unhealthy and non-positive thoughts. But most of the time, he tried to see the silver lining in the situations that he gets himself in. Even if a mission would be boring, he'd still have explored the world a little more. Even if a training session had gone bad, he'd still had learned something from it. Sensei, you could at least pretend to help us. But even he could not see the silver lining in the atrocities called D-rank missions. Unlike his two other teammates, Sho remained his typical quiet and stoic nature. But even he had a noticeable irritated edge in his eyes as he wrestled yet another pig out of the mud pit. Tomoda laughed as he watched them from his spot on the dry land. Ha ha ha, are you kidding? This is way funnier. After the test from yesterday, the three genin had been filled with determination and had each celebrated in their own way. Naruto had gone home, where Kakashi was already waiting for him, and he'd eagerly recounted what had happened during his test. Yuna had done the same to her aunt, though with less gusto than the blonde had. Even Sho did something special and treated himself to a celebratory meal. Currently, the quartet were near the western border and helping a farmer round up the pigs that had escaped from his farm. Fortunately for the team, they hadn't gone far. Unfortunately for the team, they had taken residence in a big pit of mud and were squealing in delight as they rolled around and splashed into the murky waters. Grr, just stay still, you pink abomination. As much as he tried to wrap his little arms around the annoying creatures, they were just too covered in mud to get a good grip and kept slipping away when they thrashed about. That's it, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Yuna stepped out of the mud pit, three pigs following obediently behind her as she led them to the tree where a few others were already tied up. Pretty soon, nearly all of the pigs had been rounded up. Ho, so you can put even pigs under genjutsu? Thought Tomoda in interest. A loud screech followed by the thunk of something hitting something else drew his attention back to the tree where most of the pigs had been tied up, only to see another pig that was covered in mud, passed out on the ground next to said tree. Sho, Tomoda scolded. Don't throw the pigs around. Sorry, said Sho plainly. He sounded anything but. Sensei, I really hate you right now, complained the Uzumaki. Come on Naruto, it wasn't that bad. I have to agree with him, said Yuna plainly. I need a shower. I think you all do, agreed their teacher. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll like the next mission. I hate you. Naruto's scream could be heard for kilometers as he and his two teammates chased after the bane of every newly formed genin team. Tomoda couldn't help but laugh to himself once more. Hey, someone had to make sure that Madame Shimiji's cat didn't run away. On their way back to the Hokage Tower, the two teammates of our resident Jinchuriki had been noticing strange things. The villagers were behaving in a pretty weird manner around them, almost as if they were angry or afraid of them. They'd glare at them while staying a distance away and whisper among each other as if they were ugly creatures. Or more specifically, they were acting that way towards the youngest of their group, which made no sense because despite his surprising strength, the blonde boy just looked too cute and innocent. There was no way he could have done anything that warranted such treatment. It didn't seem to bother the blonde though, much to their confusion. It's like he wasn't even noticing it. That or he was just so used to it that he didn't notice it anymore. He just kept walking on forward with his hands thrown at the back of his head casually and his bored gaze staring up at the sky. Sensei, said Yuna quietly, drawing the attention of the Jonin. What's up with the people here? Why are they looking at Naruto like that? Tomoda looked back towards the villagers with a small frown. They are too lost in their own beliefs. Don't pay any attention to them. The girl looked over towards her stoic teammate, who just shrugged back at her in equal confusion. So, the teacher began. What do you guys specialize in? The trio of kids looked at each other, wondering who was going to go first. After a few seconds, Yuna hesitantly spoke up. I'm good at genjutsu and shurikenjutsu. And I've got pretty good chakra control. Tomoda nodded along. Yes. And from what we've seen 2 days ago, you're also pretty good at thinking up strategies. And what about your weaknesses? Yuna raised an eyebrow. Hand to hand, I guess. My ninjutsu is okay. Do you know your affinity? What? No. The teacher rubbed his chin before digging his hand into his pouch. Lucky for you, I carry chakra paper with me at all times. That earned him weird looks from his students. Why? Questioned Naruto after a few seconds. Here we are. A nervous sweat drop appeared on the blonde's head when the teacher ignored him and brandished the paper instead. Channel some chakra through this. Yuna took the piece of paper and did as instructed. After a few moments, smoke began to take form on the corner of the paper before it suddenly ignited in a small burst of flame, making the girl yelp and drop it. A fire user. That's good. That means I can have lots to teach you in that department. He turned to Naruto. Now, your turn. Strengths and weaknesses. The Uzumaki fumbled slightly at the sudden shift of attention. I have a lot of chakra and stamina. I'm pretty fast and I'm alright at ninjutsu and taijutsu. I also get by in kenjutsu and wind manipulation. Tomoda nodded, hiding his surprise. That was quite the skill set for an 8-year-old. Weaknesses. Naruto shrugged. Fire users. And basically anyone that's older and stronger than me. Tomoda was about to move on to show when he realized that the blonde looked like he wanted to say more. What is it? Naruto hesitated for a few seconds. Well, I have this other skill as well. Which is? Naruto didn't reply, but a golden chain slowly coiled out of the ground from the middle of their circle. It seemed to look around, almost like a snake before awkwardly waving at them. Once the shock had dissipated and many questions had followed, Tomoda looked over to Sho. Your turn. Sho nodded and sat straighter. I specialize in earth style and iron skin, which grants me physical power and defense. Weaknesses are lightning types and genjutsu, as well as people that are faster than me. Quite the versatile team. Nodding in approval, Tomoda crossed his arms as he began to recapitulate. To summarize, we've got a wind user, a fire user and an earth user. Sho majors in taijutsu, Yuna in genjutsu and shurikenjutsu, Naruto in ninjutsu, kenjutsu and those chain thingies. I want all of you to pay special attention to your weaknesses. Having some are fine, everyone has them. But it becomes a liability when you neglect them and allow them to fester. Sho, Naruto, you two will be sparring together. Naruto, I want you to make full use of your speed. Same goes for you with your strength, Sho. He turned his attention to his third teammate. Yuna, I will be teaching you how to hone your fire manipulation. These guys already know the basics for their elements, so I need to bring you up to par. His students nodded at the rundown of their training. Standing up, Tomoda continued. This will be Mondays and Tuesdays. Wednesdays will be chakra control and elemental nature refining, as well as building up tolerance against the elements that you are weak against. As for you, Naruto, you and I will be practicing your kenjutsu. Thursdays will be focusing on you two, Sho and Yuna, on increasing your chakra capacity and stamina. We will be doing laps around the training grounds as well as doing physical workouts. Naruto raised a hand in question. Yes, Naruto, acknowledged Tomoda. I received a set of weights a few days ago. Should I bring them with me for practicing? The brunette shook his head. While training weights are a good way of increasing your speed, using them at your age will be detrimental to your growing body and to your muscles. Especially for you. The blonde looked disappointed, but nodded nonetheless. Oh well, guys, weights will have to wait for a little bit. But still, the prospect of training his elemental manipulation was filling him with excitement. Ever since he'd heard Kyuubi talk about ninshu, he'd been extremely interested in the art. He couldn't help but feel that hand seals and jutsu were too restrictive. There was so much that you could do with wind. He wanted to be able to command it, bend it to his whim. Have it completely under his control so that all he needed to call upon it was a mere thought. Fridays will be an all-out brawl between the three of you. We will be doing our training every afternoon. Mornings will be for the missions that we will be undertaking. Yuna looked at her teacher warily. Please tell me we won't have to do D ranks again. Tomoda turned silent, unnerving the three genin. He began chuckling to himself, which slowly devolved into full-blown laughter. His laughter subsided after a few seconds as he brought a hand to his face and wiped a tear with his fingers, still chuckling occasionally. Oh, my dear students. This is just the beginning of them. Their resulting faces nearly gave him another laughing fit. It didn't make sense, it just didn't make any sense. Rog. Sho let out a war cry and threw another punch at the smaller blonde, who caught it in his hands and skidded a few paces backwards with a wide grin on his face. He prided himself in his strength. Every day, he refined his skill, practiced his punches and kicks, lifted his weights, trained his techniques. The blonde threw a punch in return, making him lift his forearm to block it only to wince at the power that struck it. He disappeared from his line of sight and a sharp blow impacted against the left side of his back. Grunting and stumbling forward, Sho quickly righted himself and spun around to face the little menace once more, rubbing the sore spot on his back. When he'd fought Tomoda during the test, his teacher had overpowered him even with the use of his iron skin. But that wasn't a big deal. The man was Jonin, he was twice his age and was selected to train him and his teammates. That, he could understand. Sho rushed at Naruto, and the blonde did the same. They both met in the middle and locked fingers with both hands in a battle of mercy. The taller boy roared as his skin turned darker, his arms becoming heavier and stronger. Then how the hell was this 8-year-old keeping up with his power? Even with the use of his iron skin, even though Naruto was clearly struggling, with sweat dripping down his face and his feet sliding back under the brunt of his strength, he should have easily made him topple over by now. For his part, Naruto was having the time of his life. This was the first time that he'd truly enjoyed a fight. He loved training with Kakashi, but getting his ass tossed around for several hours wasn't exactly his idea of fun. But the constant butt kicking had made him be able to adapt to people above his rank, and for that, he was grateful. Before Mizuki, he'd never actually won a match before. He knew that he'd been holding back during his test, but then again, so was he. He was confident that he would have been able to beat him if both had been going all out. But this was different. Kakashi hit hard and precise, he did not waste time. He went in for the kill from the get-go to teach him to not let himself be wide open, to keep his head in the game. With Sho, however, he could really go all out to test his strength. He could beat Sho, he had no doubt about that. He was strong, but he was unrefined. Sho only had his strength. Naruto had a wide arsenal. He was fast, he had his chains, his wind manipulation, his sword. Even the strength advantage that Sho would usually have was practically useless now. Naruto was used to fighting experienced Jonins. In the end though, the iron skin proved too much even for him. The taller boy was managing to push his fingers back in their test of strength. Suddenly pulling his arms forward, he yanked Sho towards him and drove his foot into his stomach, making him choke up spit and kneel down on the ground and struggle to catch his breath. The blonde jumped high in the air and made a clone appear next to him at the apex of his jump. The doppelganger grabbed his creator by the wrist and spun him around several times, before throwing him with all his might at the earth user who was just managing to pick himself back up. Naruto stuck both of his feet out and double dive kicked towards Sho, which the 13-year-old hastily countered by coating his skin with a layer of earth chakra. Whoa, Yuna said, watching the spar between her two teammates with nervous sweat trailing down her forehead. Sho had never shown anything like this iron skin in the academy. And then there was the blonde wonder. Only 8 and still keeping up with people twice his size and age. Focus, Yuna, chided Tomoda as he handed her another leaf. Try again. Feel your fire nature coursing through your coils and channel it into this leaf. Dull blonde eyes stared sadly at the ground. Why did this keep happening? His feet dragged against the floor as he lamented his predicament. Day in and day out, it was the same old torture. Cheer up, Naruto. It's not so bad. Sensei, isn't it time we get a higher ranked mission? Questioned Sho moodily. Tomoda opened up the mission report, blissfully ignoring his students. We are visiting an old fishing shack that is being run by a Tokita Mamoru, along with his son and grandson. Report says that the storm from last night toppled a tree over their cabin. Thankfully no one was injured, but the place in disrepair. Naruto seemed to snap out of his funk and glanced up at the teacher. So what are we doing? Just fixing up the place. That's right. And with your clones, this should be done in no time. It was only 15 minutes later that they'd arrive and were introduced to the owners. The grandkid, Taro, was a pretty happy and energetic boy with messy dark greenish hair. The father, named Sakana, was a tall man with a shaved head and a small rope tied around his forehead as most fishermen usually did. The grandfather though, Mr. Mamoru, was a pretty weird guy. The man was balding with a goatee and had several ugly scars running across his face. He didn't seem like a bad person. But his eyes, they seemed empty. When you talked to him, he didn't look at you, he didn't answer, he didn't seem to even notice you were there. He just kept mumbling, always slowly mumbling something under his breath. Grandpa's been through all 3 wars. Naruto turned towards Taro when he noticed him staring, Yuna and Sho also paying attention to the conversation. Dad says he's been like this for a while ever since the 3rd war was over. He's aware enough to take care of himself, but he's not that good at having conversations. The young fisherman sighed and shook his head. Dad lets him stay though. This shop used to belong to him and my grandma when she was still alive and was passed on to us. He's hanging in there, at least there's that. The members of Team 5 got to work without another word, all except for Naruto. He was still curiously looking at the old man who was sitting in his chair, staring at nothing in particular and fumbling with his own hands. This guy had lived through 3 wars, he'd been to hell and back. He probably had a lot of amazing stories to tell. Too bad that no one would be able to hear them. We're gonna fix your house right up, Mr. Tokita, don't you worry. The old man said nothing and kept staring at his hands with the same vacant stare. My eyes were fluid cobras, yeah. He wondered what he meant by that. Naruto, get moving. Turning his head towards where Yuna's voice had come from, he sighed and manifested 5 clones around him. Alright guys, let's do this. Thank you so much for all your help. Sakura smiled at the members of Team 5 while accompanying them to the exit. I don't know what we would have done without all of you. And you, young lad. That clone technique of yours is quite the sight to behold. It was my understanding that it used quite a lot of energy, but you look none the worse for wear. Naruto smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. I'm a special case. Sakura-san, called out Tomoda, getting the fisherman's attention and gesturing towards the report in his hand. If you would sign here please, this will conclude our mission. As his teacher was being busy wrapping up the mission, the Jinchuriki looked back towards the chair that Mr. Tokita had been occupying the entire time. It was kinda unnerving the way he had barely twitched a muscle within the past several hours. You alright? The blonde blinked and glanced at his female teammate who was staring at him with a curious expression. I wonder what he's thinking about. Yuna tilted her head slightly at that. I've met someone like this before. Post-traumatic stress can affect people in varying ways. Some break down, some become like this. That statement made Naruto frown and stare at the ground. He must be in a lot of pain. The girl with the ponytail stared at him for a few more moments before turning back towards the rest of her team. Come on, we're leaving. His gaze lingered on the old man for a little while longer, but soon turned around as well and followed after her. Phew, it's finally over. Tomoda sighed as he and his students stepped out of the fishing shed. They'd been at this for nearly 6 hours, he really needed a stiff drink from Shushia's right now. Sho grunted and stuffed his hands in his pockets. I'm just glad we had Naruto's clones. Yeah, who knows how long this would have taken otherwise. Yuna agreed with a small smile. The Jonin grinned as he listened to his students interact with one another. They'd each been pretty cold and distant at the beginning, what with Sho and Yuna not being very expressive of their emotions and Naruto being naturally introverted, but they had come a long way after 2 months of training and doing missions together. They could all hold an actual conversation together now, and could rely on each other pretty well. Their coordination in general still had much to be desired, but it was a drastic improvement to 2 months ago. Sensei. Huh. He looked over towards the kids to see them all staring at him. He must have spaced out again. He really needed to stop doing that. Yuna crossed her arms. I was asking you what we were doing now. Are we meeting up at the training ground? Tomoda shook his head. No, I can go report by myself. No training today, so you 3 can head on home and enjoy your afternoons. If that's the case, I'll see you guys later. Yuna said and hurried off in a random direction. Sho nodded to the 2 and he too went his own way. Naruto stared at where his 2 teammates had previously been standing in not 2 seconds ago with bemusement. What was that all about? Hearing no response, he turned back around to face his teacher. Sensei. When he looked over, he too was gone, making him the only one left there. What? This was a strange evening, Naruto had decided. The day had gone by as it usually did for the past 2 months. He'd woken up, did some stretching, had his breakfast and met up with his team near the Hokage Tower. After that they had all gone to the mission lobby to get their usual D rank and went ahead and completed it. But the afternoon was when it took a strange turn. There was no training for once, which was strange. Tomoda-sensei was a stickler for consistency. He'd never given them days off before except for the weekends. As if that wasn't enough, they'd all hurried off in their own direction, almost as if they were late for something. It didn't take him long to shake off the confusion though, he'd long gotten accustomed to his team's oddities. But the night just kept on getting weirder. He went to look for Kakashi at his usual spots, at his house, at the memorial stone, at Shushia's, and even at Kinta's bookshop. He was nowhere to be seen. Kakashi usually came to tell him whenever he'd leave the village to take on missions. Even weirder, once he gave up on finding the elusive ninja, he'd tried going to Ichiraku's to treat himself to some ramen, but they were closed. He'd literally never seen that place closed before. Having ran out of people to spend time with, Naruto dejectedly made his way home. Rustle rustle, click, kriak. What a disappointing day. Naruto couldn't help but think to himself as he unlocked the door to his house and pushed it open, making sure to close it properly behind him. He knew it was selfish to think that the people he knew had lives of their own and he couldn't always be relying on them to stave off his boredom and loneliness. But still, where was everyone? Within the darkness, his hand traveled towards the switch to his apartment reflexively and flicked the light on. Surprise! The poor blonde nearly jumped out of his skin at the sight that greeted him. Festive decorations were hanging on his walls with balloons and confetti everywhere. A group had gathered within his small apartment as well. Geez, he'd been so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't even sensed anyone here. Old Man Tuki and Ayame were wearing big grins on their faces, their cooking attire gone for once. His team was there too. Yuna and Sho were surprisingly wearing party hats. It was quite the funny sight to see his stoic, stone-faced teammates wearing those silly things. Tomoda was a lot more cheerful, loudly blowing on one of those party horns. Kakashi was also there, wearing his usual uniform. Though he too was wearing a party hat, and so were several of his Jonin friends that he'd taken along. He recognized them. Kurenai, Guy, Yugao and Asuma. What on earth was going on? Wha. Naruto couldn't help but stutter in surprise. Kakashi's eye curved up at his former student's befuddled expression and stepped forward to ruffle his hair. Happy birthday, Naruto. The boy's eyes darted to his calendar that was hanging off the kitchen. What was today? Yep, sure enough, today was October 10th. How could he have forgotten what today was? His eyes began to moisten again as the familiar yet unfamiliar feeling swelled up in his chest. There was even a cake and a few small presents strewn around on the table. That was so thoughtful of them. You guys, he honestly didn't know what to say. Anything coming out of his mouth wouldn't feel genuine enough in his opinion. He couldn't even begin to formulate how grateful he felt. Thankfully, he didn't have to say anything. Kakashi had always been able to read him like an open book. Hokage-sama will stop by soon. He got a bit caught up at work but he'll make an appearance. Naruto smiled and nodded. Even if things were a bit rough between him and the old man Hokage, he appreciated the fact that he'd be here regardless. Thank you, everyone, he said shakily. And the smiles he received in return filled his heart with joy. The party had been going on for 2 hours now. The adults were drinking and having a good time, and he and his two teammates had been happily talking amongst each other. The Hokage had showed up for a few minutes, wished him a happy birthday and left a present as well. Unfortunately, he had to leave again soon after. Strangely enough though, Kakashi had suddenly pulled him aside from all the action with the strangest look in his eyes. He'd never seen him look so hesitant before. I promised you that I wouldn't keep any more lies from you, Kakashi said suddenly, making Naruto nod hesitantly. There's one more thing. He seemed pretty anxious about this. He'd learned that he contained a giant beast that destroyed his hometown and killed the fourth Hokage inside of his stomach, and that same Hokage was his own father and had been sealed inside of the belly of the death god. What could possibly warrant such uncertainty from the Jonin? Have you ever heard of Jiraiya of the Sannin? The boy nodded. Of course he'd heard of him. He along with the two others, Tsunade and Orochimaru were pretty much legends in the history books. As far as he knew, all three were still alive. He trained the Yondaime, he said, making the blonde's eyes widen. And he is your godfather. Naruto didn't know how to feel right now. It was like someone had ripped the ground from beneath his feet and his whole life had been turned upside down. Jiraiya was his godfather. What did this mean? Jiraiya knew his dad. He had trained him and groomed him to be Hokage. That meant that the two were close, right? He was a Sannin. And being a Sannin in pretty much the biggest military village probably meant an abundance of wealth, right? So, either he was dead and no one knew about it, or he didn't give two fucks about him. Kakashi-sensei, muttered Naruto in a weak tone. What should I do? What am I supposed to feel? He was feeling so lost right now, so betrayed, and a million questions were running rampant inside his head. Kakashi stayed quiet as well, not really knowing what to say. He'd met Jiraiya before, he honestly wasn't a bad character, and he wrote some nice books. But he just couldn't agree with the "I'm too busy" excuse. In the end though, he decided to smile and place a comforting hand on the shorter boy's shoulder. What I think isn't important. This is something you need to figure out on your own. He withdrew his hand and looked at the couch where Yuna and Sho were idly chatting. But today is a day of celebration. For now, focus on what is good rather than what is bad. He looked over to what had caught his teacher's attention, and his eyes fell upon his two teammates. They had all come a long way since 2 months ago. Sho never smiled and was still as stoic as ever, but only they could see that his eyes lacked the edge they held when they'd first met, or the fact that his demeanor was a lot less guarded. Yuna noticed his eyes from across the room and gave him a small smile in return. Naruto smiled back and an invisible weight seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. Yeah, tonight, he wouldn't worry about that. A sharp blade cut through the air and knocked away a kunai's trajectory, saving the young boy from a fatal wound. Sheathing the tanto and jumping up in the air to avoid Sho's double-handed sledgehammer strike, the young Uzumaki flipped to right himself and willed two chains to burst out of the ground and tightly wrap around the older boy. Naruto deftly landed on the shoulders of the incapacitated Earth user, as blue eyes shot back towards his other teammate, who was keeping her distance and watching him warily. It hadn't taken long to determine who was the strongest of the three. In fact, it had taken about 2 minutes into their first three-way brawl. As much as Sho loathed to admit it, the blonde outshined him in every department save for brute strength when he had his iron skin activated. But even then, Naruto's broad repertoire made it easy for him to make up for that fact. While Naruto wasn't as good as Yuna when it came to plan making and strategizing, he was extremely clever and could come up with the most unpredictable scenarios on the spot. Last week, he'd managed to create a clone and have it transform into a pebble once they were both distracted and took them by surprise when they least expected it. Her superior intellect was countered with his cunning mind. Her skills at shurikenjutsu was countered by his incredible control over his chains and his quick reflexes. Her genjutsu was, for some reason, not having any effect on him. It was like there was something that was protecting him or making him immune. So, the two oldest members of Team 5 had decided to team up together in an effort to be able to beat him. It took a while for Sho to agree to the idea, thinking it was dishonorable to do so, but after a number of losses, he eventually complied. The 9-year-old shunshin forward and threw a forward kick, which was blocked by the girl but still sent her skidding back a few meters. Rushing in close, Naruto sent 2 more punches who were narrowly dodged and countered by a low kick of her own. The blonde jumped over it and spun horizontally, sending a punch to her gut, making her grunt in pain and keel over slightly. Sho finally freed himself from the chains and jumped the distance, attempting to deliver a powerful double kick at the smaller blonde. Unfortunately, he was too fast and agile and managed to hop away at the last second. Sho landed heavily on the ground, kicking up a lot of dust and making visibility become poor. Yuna coughed and leaned back up, a hand placed on her stomach. She sent an irritated look towards her oldest teammate and frowned. Damn it, Sho, now we won't be able to see him. Sho didn't reply, instead put his hands in the snake release. Earth style. Bottomless swamp. The earthy ground around them soon turned into thick mud, forcing the young blonde out of his hiding spot and up on a tree branch. Yuna sent a dozen shuriken at him, making him dodge to the side and pull out his tanto to deflect them. While he was being distracted, her hands flew through hand seals. She breathed out a medium-sized fireball that soared through the air, heading right at Naruto. The blonde was about to go through hand seals to counter when Sho landed next to him on the branch and delivered a right hook at his face, nailing him on the cheek and sending him headfirst into the fireball. The flaming ball impacted against him and both genin covered their eyes at the brilliant show of light. Once the fire had subsided, they looked at the results to find nothing. There wasn't anyone there anymore. He, a mischievous cackle made them look towards the other side of the clearing. Their youngest teammate was standing there, completely unharmed and rubbing his index finger under his nose smugly. You guys are gonna have to try harder than that to get me. The cheeky genin said. Yuna grit her teeth together and clenched her hands in anger. I'll show you, you cheeky, but before she could say further, the loud ringing of a clock signaled the end of their sparring match. And time. Tomoda called out as he walked towards his 3 students. Good job everyone, you did great. Sho, good use of the mud technique. Yuna, I saw that distraction you did with the shuriken. That was pretty smart. However, you should always assume that the enemy is still standing until you've confirmed that they're actually down for the count. Naruto, you did good, but next time use the confusion of your disappearance to your advantage instead of remaining hidden. Calling out to them was a big mistake. If the timer hadn't rung when it did, that would have been a huge missed opportunity. Every seconds and every little mistakes can be the difference between life and death on the battlefield. Yuna tiredly fell into a sitting position to rest her sore legs. Out of the 3, she was the least physically fit and the worst one when it came to endurance and hand-to-hand. Sho picked up a water bottle and took some long sips from it as he leaned his body against a tree. The day is still young, remarked Tomoda as he looked up at the sky. I think we have time for a quick D rank. All 3 genin groaned in response, causing him to chuckle. Don't give up guys, we're almost done with the required missions before we're able to move on to C ranks. Naruto scoffed and grumbled under his breath. Wouldn't be so bad if you weren't a lazy bum. What was that? Nothing. Team 5 reporting for duty. The fire leader looked up from his paperwork and smiled at the team. Ah, Tomoda-san. Here for your daily D rank, I take it. That's right, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen sifted through some paperwork. Today we have a few interesting ones. The Inuzuka kennels need to be cleaned again. The various amount of honeys and secretions produced by the Aburame insects need to be collected. The garden around the Yamanaka compound needs to be trimmed. Th. Bang. Hokage-sama. Taro-san. You can't just barge in like this. All heads turned to the door as Tokita Taro, the grandson of Tokita Mamoru, barged in with the Hokage's secretary Kimi following close behind. Naruto recognized the boy. He was the one they'd fixed the fishing shack for a few weeks ago. Hiruzen waved his secretary off. It's quite all right, Kimi, you may return to your desk. The Hokage turned his eyes towards the panting child with an eyebrow raised questioningly. Taro-kun, is something the matter? Hokage-sama, repeated Taro once he'd caught his breath. It's my grandpa, Mamoru. He's gone missing. This drew surprised looks from everyone within the room, Naruto in particular. That old guy is. Hiruzen steepled his fingers together, a deep frown upon his features. That is troubling news, Taro-kun. Do you have any idea where he might have gone? Taro shook his head quickly as his face took on a pleading look. No, I don't, Hokage-sama. Please, you need to find him. Calm yourself, do not worry. We will find Mamoru-san. The Sandame turned back towards the genin team. Team 5, are you up for the task? Tomoda saluted, along with his 3 genin behind him. We accept, Hokage-sama. Taro sniffled and wiped his eyes, looking at the people in front of him gratefully. Thank you. Please find my Gigi. Naruto's features became serious, and a look of complete conviction could be clearly seen on his face. We will find him, I promise. You can count on us. Or so he thought. The village of Konoha was very, very big. Naruto had made 20 shadow clones, and even with 21 of him along with his 2 teammates and sensei, they still haven't found him after 3 hours. Nothing over here, reported Sho through his earpiece. Acknowledged. Continue further. Yuna, any visual evidence? None, sensei. No one has seen him. Naruto, anything to report? Naruto cursed under his breath and pressed the switch on his earpiece. My clones haven't found a damn thing yet. Tomoda frowned and looked around from his vantage point. No sign of Tokita Mamoru. This wasn't looking good. He was startled when a gray figure wearing a mouse mask suddenly dropped down next to him. Jonin Wada Tomoda. Yes. He replied in surprise. Report from the Hokage. Civilian Tokita Taro has informed us that former Special Jonin Tokita Mamoru had a residence east of the memorial statue. Does Hokage-sama think that he'll be there? The Anbu with the mouse mask nodded. It's a possibility, one that is worthy of investigation. Tomoda quickly thanked the Anbu and relayed the information to his team. I'm near that place, said Naruto quickly. I can get there in 2 minutes. Good. Naruto, go there and investigate. We will converge and join you there. Right, replied the three voices at the same time. Naruto pumped chakra through his legs and body as he body flickered as fast as he could to the destination. There was the memorial stone that Kakashi-sensei spent so much time in. He continued past it and turned to the right, following the beaten path, and soon came upon a small little run-down house. This is Naruto. I have arrived at the location. Going in to investigate. Good work. We're not far behind. Naruto walked up to the door, an odd feeling of trepidation growing in the pit of his stomach. What was happening? Something was telling him he wouldn't like whatever he would find behind that door. Raising his hand, he knocked on the door several times and gulped nervously. Mr. Tokita, are you in there? No answer. Naruto knocked again. I'm coming in, he said. Still no answer. He grabbed the doorknob and turned it, slowly opening it. A stack of ropes to the side caught his attention, all with their ends cut off and sporting failed fishing knots. He shakily brought a hand to his earpiece as he made his way through the corridor. Something's wrong. I'm getting a bad feeling. Naruto, what's the situation? The blonde didn't seem to hear him as he neared the end of the corridor and pushed the door open, who creaked in protest from old age. The Uzumaki stepped in, and felt his blood run cold. Mr. Tokita was there, and a rope attached to a wooden beam on the ceiling was tied around his neck, making his body hang loosely and gently rock to and fro. The poor blonde took a shaky step back as he fought back the urge to vomit. The door behind him burst open, his frantic teacher appearing and placing a hand on his shoulder. Naruto. What's going? Tomoda trailed off as he noticed the scene being displayed in front of him, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. His two other students soon followed after him, though both skidded to a halt as they too saw what was going on. Oh God, Yuna said as she covered her mouth in horror. Even Sho seemed greatly disturbed by this, his skin taking an unnatural pale color. Tomoda took a step forward as he placed his hands on the body and lifted it slightly to ease off the strain around the man's neck. Quick, somebody help me get him down, he said quickly. Sho rushed forward, a kunai in hand, and used it to cut the rope off. Mamoru collapsed onto Tomoda's shoulder, who proceeded to lie him down gently onto the floor and pressed an ear to his chest. Naruto watched all of this happening. He watched the angry red marks around his neck that the rope had left. He watched the drool that had gathered in the corners of his mouth during his final moments. He watched his empty eyes, glazed over and still opened in pain. Tomoda pulled away in remorse when he heard no sound coming from his chest. Mamoru's skin was cold. This had been done a while ago. He was gone. Chapter 10. Stranger Danger. You promised. Blue eyes remained dejectedly fixed onto the ground below, unable to meet the angry brown ones of the younger boy in front of him. Besides him, his two teammates shifted uneasily, a small frown on their faces. I'm sorry. Taro clenched his fists, tears welling up in his eyes once more. You said I could count on you. It's all your fault, he shouted at the blonde, making him flinch subtly. Grandpa's gone now. Yuna's lips curled down in discontent as she stepped in front of the blonde Jinchuriki, almost protectively. Don't talk to Naruto like that. It's not his fault. Tomoda raised both of his hands in an attempt to placate the upset duo in front of him. Why don't we all just take a breather and think things through carefully? Naruto looked at his teammates back in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to jump to his defense. The little boy sniffled, and his father Sakana sighed and placed a hand on top of his son's head. I apologize, Shinobi-san. Taro doesn't mean any of that, it's just the grief talking. Of course, that was understandable. Even now, the sadness in the man's eyes and posture were clearly evident. Regardless if the old war veteran wasn't all there, he was still their dear family member. Mamoru had quickly been taken to the hospital and handed over to the medic Nin, though the autopsy just confirmed what they already knew. There was no coming back from it. The rope had already cut off all of his blood supply going to his head and his windpipe had been crushed. Sakura had chosen to take the body with him, choosing to bury him in their family graveyard. And now here they stood, in front of their newly repaired fishing shack an hour after the body had been found. "I thank you for finding my father," the fisherman said once his son had retreated back into their home. He kneeled in front of the whiskered boy who was still frowning, eyes lost and fixed on the ground. "Please don't blame yourself for this." Naruto looked up at the man. "Taro feels that way now, but those feelings will pass. He'll come around eventually." Naruto nodded slowly but said nothing. Glancing down at his three genin, Tomoda cleared his throat and nodded at Sakura. "My condolences, Tokita-san. We will be on our way now." They made their way back to the village in silence. Morale was low, not that he was expecting much else. Anyway, it's better that they experience death here in the safety of their village than in some unknown territory surrounded by enemies. Everyone had been affected, though from all of them, Naruto seemed to have taken it the hardest. Not only from finding the body, but also due to his promise to Taro. It was easier on the Jonin though. While what had happened was terrible, he was used to death. He'd been a shinobi for 11 years after all. But his team, this was their first experience with it, and would definitely not be the last. "So guys," he said, drawing the attention of the genin. "What do you say we go grab a bite to eat?" It was a pathetic attempt to bring up everyone's mood, but anything would be better than this awful silence. His three students stared up at him. No one replied, but the ever-stoic Sho nodded his head once, arms crossed over his body. He had been the first out of the three to recover from the shock. "Sorry, I'll pass," came the small voice of Naruto. The other members turned to him, a concerned expression on their faces as they watched the little blonde stuff his hands in his pockets and walk off in another direction. Sho opened his mouth to call out to him, but a hand landing on his shoulder made him stop short. The Earth user turned towards his teacher, an eyebrow raised questioningly. Tomoda just shook his head with a grim expression on his face. He hadn't managed to keep his promise. Dull eyes stared at the ground below him. The normally lively atmosphere of the streets of Konoha seemed so dark and hollow now. The people chattering about, the children playing outside of shops, they had all turned into faceless gray figures. Was it really his fault? Even if he hadn't made that promise, old man Mamoru still would have died. But making that promise had given Taro hope. It had given him hope. But it was that same hope that now made him feel so shattered. That same hope that now made Taro feel betrayed, cheated. It was almost as if making that promise had made things infinitely worse. What was the point of a promise if you couldn't even keep it? What was the point of it if it could be broken so easily? He knew that promises weren't magical. If you made some impossible promise, then the only person you had to blame once it failed was yourself. He knew this, deep down. But making that promise had made him feel like he could do the impossible. But he'd been forced to face the harsh reality. Promises could be broken. Promises would be broken. Just because he made one didn't mean that he could do the impossible. After all, he was no one. Just a weak little genin. "Ah, Naruto. Your usual order." The boy looked up, noticing that his feet had carried him to Ichiraku's. Tsuki was grinning down at him with his usual smile that would have been contagious any other time. Naruto nodded and took a seat at the far right end, grateful at Tsuki for not saying anything about his lack of enthusiasm. What did this mean for his promise to Kyuubi? He'd given himself an impossible task during his haste to help the Biju. He didn't know where the Shinigami mask was. He didn't know where to begin looking. He didn't even know what he would do once he found it. Was this another promise that he wouldn't be able to keep? He barely noticed the bowl that was placed in front of him, the world around him having morphed into cacophony of sounds and motions he could barely register. The more he thought about this, the more it felt like he was slipping into a deep pit of despair. What about all the other Biju? All the other Jinchuriki? He'd made a promise to himself that he would find them, that he would free them. Quote, comma, exclamation mark, quote. Learning their names, gaining the right to use Kyuubi's, meeting his father, uniting the world. Was that all just a faraway dream? An unobtainable ambition that had no hope to be achieved? Why? What was he thinking? All of these goals, meeting the Biju, learning Ninshu, bringing the nations together. There was no way he could do all of that. He was a nobody. Hey, Choji, let it go, man. No way, he's letting his ramen go cold. Hey, are you gonna eat that? The blonde snapped out of his reverie and, just like that, color and motion returned to the real world. Blinking rapidly, he looked to his left to see two kids about his age a few seats across from his. One was a pudgy kid with brown hair and red swirls on his cheeks. Next to him, the one that was sitting 2 seats to his left, was a boy with a head shaped like a pineapple with his hair being tied in a spiky ponytail. Both boys were looking at him, though the bigger of the two kids seemed much more interested in him than the skinnier kid. Huh. The Akamichi pointed his chopsticks at the bowl in front of him. Your ramen. Are you gonna finish it? Naruto looked down at the ramen in front of him with unfocused eyes before turning back towards the other kid. No. Then can I? The Uzumaki said nothing but slid the bowl over to the pineapple-haired kid regardless, who sighed and passed the bowl on to the other kid next to him. Yeah, free ramen. Thanks. Naruto didn't pay attention to the happenings next to him, once again becoming lost in his own thoughts and staring blankly at the countertop. The hungry kid didn't seem to even notice it, but the one sitting next to him definitely did. What a strange guy. He and his best friend Choji had stopped by at Ichiraku's today, a ramen place that they went to sometimes for their delicious noodles. Now, Shikamaru wasn't as big of an eater as his friend was, but he definitely could enjoy good food whenever the opportunity presented itself. However, not long after they started eating and Shikamaru was just finishing his bow, with Choji finishing his third, he noticed a blonde boy with whisker marks make his way inside the stall like a zombie that had just risen from his grave. He was definitely weird. Surprisingly, he was wearing a Konoha headband even though he appeared to be their age. Even weirder, he didn't look like he was noticing anything that was going on around him. It was like he was there, but not there at the same time. He barely moved when the bowl was served to him, and he barely moved when his friend had been calling out to him for an entire minute. So Choji had finally gotten his attention. But even though the blonde could clearly hear him, it felt like talking to him was like attempting to talk to Ino about anything that wasn't related to Sasuke and flowers. He didn't seem to be a bad person though, since he did give his bowl over to Choji. But even after that, he just reverted back to staring at nothing. Those eyes were unsettling. Those eyes didn't belong on a kid. Where had he seen those eyes before? Oh, that's right. He'd seen them on his dad. Oi. For the second time within the span of 5 minutes, Naruto's declining train of thought was interrupted once more by an annoying kid that just could not leave him alone. Glancing next to him, he saw the pineapple-haired boy sending him a weird look, an eyebrow raised in mild curiosity at him. Are you okay? That took him by surprise. No one outside of his team and the older people he was close with ever cared about how he felt, and he could count them on his fingers and still have some left over. Maybe that boy wasn't as annoying as he'd initially thought. Yeah. The lazy-looking kid nodded and after a few awkward seconds with only the slurping sounds of Choji eating his ramen filling in the silence, decided to introduce himself. I'm Shikamaru. Naruto sent him a confused stare, not sure whether or not to offer his name as well. Not that there was much to fear anyway, he was a shinobi and could protect himself. Still, the years of scavenging, stealing and surviving had taught him to be cautious about everything. Naruto. He finally said with clear hesitation. The pineapple-haired nodded and turned back towards his friend, resuming his previous conversation with him. It was after a few more minutes that he addressed the blonde Jinchuriki again. I've seen that look before. He said, surprising the Uzumaki. I heard it's good to talk about it. A careless shrug. You're welcome to talk if you want. Shikamaru said no more and diverted his attention elsewhere, leaving Naruto to ponder that statement for a while. Was this really okay? He didn't know that kid. Hell, he didn't know if that kid would even understand his dilemma. The only other person he usually talked about his problems to was Kakashi. But in the end, what did he have to lose? It took him a while to muster up the courage to speak up again. During that time, Shikamaru's friend had finished his third bowl and had opened up a packet of barbecue chips. He seemed all too happy to just sit there and munch on them for a while. He said slowly, making the lazy kid turn back to him. I broke a promise. A promise. Shikamaru placed his chin on his open hand and stared up at the ceiling in boredom. Yeah, As a matter of fact, so did I. I said to my troublesome mother that I would fold the laundry tonight and I forgot to. He sighed and shrugged his shoulders. I'm gonna be in a lot of trouble tonight. Man, that's troublesome. Naruto stared at him in disbelief. That was not helpful to him. At all. Those two problems were on entirely different spectrums. Still, he found himself questioning him further against his own will. What do you do when you can't keep a promise, I mean? Brown eyes came back down to meet his. I just try harder next time, I guess. Try harder. Was it really that simple? No amount of trying harder could have saved Mamoru, but that didn't mean that he couldn't try his best to keep the other promises that he'd made, right? It all seemed so daunting right now, but if he just gave up without even trying, what would that make him? A coward. Uzumaki Naruto was not a coward. This revelation was like a slap in the face. Who knew that an academy student that looked even younger than him would have had the answer to this nightmare? Naruto's lips twitched up slightly into a small smile as he scratched at his hair in frustration. Haha, can't believe I've been acting so stupid, ya know, thanks Shikamaru. Ya know. The Nara decided to ignore that strange verbal tick and shrugged back in response. Sure, he watched as the weird whiskered boy rose from his feet, toss a few coins onto the counter and run off in some unknown direction. Choji peeked from behind Shikamaru to look at the retreating blonde, still noisily munching his chips. What was that about, Shikamaru? You never try harder. Shikamaru turned towards his friend and placed his index finger against his lips. Shish. Sho hummed with a raised eyebrow. And you sure you're alright? I'm telling you, yes, I'm fine now. It was quite funny to see his stoic teammate break out of character and fuss about his two juniors, as rare as that was. His team had been pretty worried about him when he'd left them 3 days ago. They'd all been affected, but Naruto had taken it the worst out of all 3 of them. Thankfully, they'd had the entire weekend to gather their thoughts and recuperate. Well, I'm glad that you're feeling better now, Naruto. Tomoda looked at his 3 students. All of you. Death will be something that you have to deal with more and more as you progress through the ranks. I'm proud of you all for overcoming this. A fleeting smile appeared on Yuna's face, though it disappeared so fast that the members of Team 5 had to wonder if it had even been there in the first place. Are we going to do another D rank today, sensei? Actually, no. Tomoda smiled at the 3 wide-eyed and hopeful looks that he received. We've completed the required number of D rank missions, so today we can take our first C rank. Finally, many villagers nearby jumped in surprise at the blonde's loud outburst. His teammates were also both rejoicing in their own little way, with Yuna's small smile and Sho's crossed arm and satisfied grunt. This was a pretty big moment. They had been doing these hellish D ranks for nearly 3 months by now. Tomoda chuckled as Naruto eagerly bounced around him. What do you think the C rank is gonna be, sensei? Are we gonna protect a noble? Save a princess? Free a country? He knew it was a pretty naive thought, but one could always dream. I very much doubt that, shrimp. Naruto bristled at the shot to his height. C ranks are usually basic errands and escorts missions, and no, only merchants and peasants. Nobles are A rank and over. Man, the Jinchuriki kicked at a pebble dejectedly. Oh well, at least it won't be some lame chore. A bead of sweat slowly rolled down the side of his forehead and over his whiskered cheek. Man, he forgot how scary the old man Hokage could be sometimes. Don't think that I didn't hear about the latest mission reports, Team 5. Drawled out Hiruzen Sarutobi, a slight edge to his voice. We don't know what you're talking about, old M. Hokage-sama. The fire shadow stood up and began to pace around the room, reading off a scroll in his hands. Disturbance of peace. Misconduct. Damaged properties. Attempted murder of a noble pet. Hiruzen stared up at the nervous genin in front of him. Have you anything to say for yourself? Naruto gulped nervously as his team remained quiet. The Hokage frowned and sat back down behind his desk. You used explosives to scare poor Tora into a trap. That is highly dangerous and unacceptable. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, comma, quote. It was Naruto's idea. What? Said Blonde exclaimed. Agreed. Entirely his fault. Naruto deadpanned at his teammates. Not cool, guys. Naruto. Hiruzen leveled a warning stare towards him. I know you are about to go on your first C rank right now, but trust that you will be punished for this once you return. The Uzumaki visibly deflated at that. Yes, Hokage-sama. Now. Hiruzen's frown suddenly vanished and was replaced by a kind smile as he looked at the other members of Team Tomoda. I believe you were about to pick your mission. So what's the mission, sensei? Tomoda chuckled and opened up his scroll. Settle down, Naruto. We are going to Hacho village. A group of bandits have been pillaging and killing people, and as such merchants are too afraid to come to the village. Our job is to drive them away. He looked over towards his team. Peacefully or forcefully. So, this was finally happening. This would be the first time where he and his team's life would actually be on the line. This was the moment that they had all been training for. I'll give you half an hour to get ready. We will meet at the gates by 8:30 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Naruto turned towards his teammates with a nervous smile as their teacher disappeared in a puff of smoke. Our first C rank, this is exciting. He said, making Sho nod in agreement. It will be good to get out of the village for once. Yuna walked off towards her house and spoke over her shoulder. Make sure to pack properly. See you in half an hour. Quit fidgeting, Naruto. I can't help it, sensei. We're finally on our first real mission. It's really exciting. Yuna couldn't help the smile that appeared on her face at her teammates' enthusiasm. You're gonna waste all of your energy if you keep going on like that. Currently, the quartet was traveling at ninja speed through the thick trees that made up the forest around Konoha. Hacho village was on the borders of Fire Country, so unfortunately it would take them a little while to get there. And it did take them a few hours. After traveling until noon, checking in at the village entrance and showing off all the legal documents needed, they were soon escorted to the leader of the village, an old man named Disanasu. Disanasu was an elderly with yellow eyes, a gray beard and dark brown eyebrows, though it was hard to tell under the thick brown head cloth that fit with his jacket and pants. The old man had told them that the bandits had been camping out 2 kilometers away from the village towards the east and would probably be coming back soon. Hacho village, being comprised primarily of civilians, could do little to defend themselves against the bandits. So now, Team 5 was surveying the bandit camp a few distance away, hidden by the shrubbery of the trees they were perched upon. Even though they wanted to resolve the matter peacefully first, they wanted to know the layout of the place in case things went awry. The only entrance to the left seemed to be very poorly guarded, the only one there was a bandit that looked to have fallen asleep on a chair. The entire camp though wasn't very populated, there was at most 4 or 5 people in the place. Before we go in, there's something I'd like to say to you all. The tone in their teacher's voice made the 3 genin pause and look at their sensei. Never before had they heard him sound as serious as he was being right now. He was usually a laid-back and easy-going guy. We are shinobi of the Hidden Leaf. Remember where we come from. We are not barbarians and will not attack if the situation does not call for it. His eyes moved from one student to another. With that being said, these bandits are scum and rarely listen to reason. Be prepared, chances are that you will have to take lives today. Each student seemed to be a little shaken by this. Of course, they knew they would have to take a life eventually, but knowing one thing and actually acting upon it were vastly different. No amount of preparing and studying would change how they feel during the act. When you are fighting someone, and when you are about to take their life, you may feel sadness for them. Pity, empathy. You will freeze up and second-guess yourself. A single second can decide the outcome of an entire battle. Close your heart to it. On your journey as a shinobi, you will face against all matter of ninja. Some will be cruel and sadistic, some will be kind-hearted and will only be doing their jobs. Taking a deep breath, he continued, closing his eyes as the genin listened to him intently and hung onto his every word. In the end, this is our job. And no matter who they are, if they stand against our village then they stand against you as well. Close your heart to their desperation. Close your heart to their suffering. Do not allow yourself to feel for them. They will not feel for you. Tomoda stood up and dusted his pants, his 3 students slowly following his example. Looking back towards the bandit camp, Naruto took in a shaky breath of air and attempted to calm his nerves. No going back now. Tanjo. A bunch o' ninja freaks are at the gate. They said they wanna talk to the leader. Huh. Tanjo quickly stood up from his chair and rushed over to his window. You fool, gather the others. Tanjo hurried over to the entrance of the camp, bloodshot eyes wide open in fury as the rest of his men gathered around behind him, each wielding their own personal choice of weapon. Go away, ninja. We don't want you. Air. The thug leader yelled as he clutched his rusty sword tighter to his body. The men behind him yelled in agreement, and Team 5 could smell the alcohol on their breath from where they were standing. Tomoda stepped forward. Now hold on, we just want to talk. We got nothing to say to ya. The fire user sighed. We are under orders to have you evacuate from this area and return all of your stolen goods to the village. If you can do so, then you will be brought to trial with no death penalty. Refusal to comply will result in your imminent termination. One of the thugs turned towards his friends. He said Imi-ha. Tanjo grit his teeth and turned towards his henchman. Shut up, you idiot. The crazy leader faced Team 5 once more and took a threatening step forward while swinging his sword around. And you better leave now, else there'll be trouble. Tomoda shook his head in pity and inclined his head to look at his team from the corner of his eye. I will take the leader. You three, take the 4 others. They're only civilians, so they will be easy pickings. Remember what I told you. The 3 children looked at each other and nodded before each splitting off in their own direction. Tanjo yelled out incoherently in anger and turned towards the 3 kids that were now behind him only to be intercepted by Tomoda. You're facing me right now. Oi, who do ya think are punk? Sho frowned and crossed his arms as he faced off against his 2 enemies. He was the only one of his teammates to have gotten 2 opponents instead of 1, but that didn't really matter to him. It's not like they posed much of a threat anyway. I apologize. This is just business. The Earth user seemed to vanish from the untrained eyes of the 2 bandits and reappeared in front of one of them. His arms became darker, and his fist descended brutally on the top of the right bandit's cranium, killing him instantly. Close your heart to their desperation. What the? The left bandit screamed in surprise and rushed at Sho, hoping to catch him off guard while his back was turned. Unfortunately for him, he was used to fighting the blonde menace in his team that was annoyingly fast and sneaky. Spinning around, Sho easily diverted the bat swing away from him and planted his fist in the guy's sternum, making him spit up blood. His eyes rolled up and he lost consciousness, his body limply falling to the floor. Sho's hands began to shake slightly as he watched the 2 downed bodies, one dead and one unconscious. Closing his hands into fists and taking a deep breath, he retrieved a kunai from his pouch and moved forward to finish the job. Swish, swish. Yuna hopped away from yet another failed attempt to behead her. The bandit that she was facing off against was wearing a red bandana, missing half of his teeth, and was clumsily swinging around a chipped naginata. Putting some distance between her and her enemy, she interlaced her fingers into the horse sign. The man in front of him froze in place, eyes going wide. His breathing picked and he raised the naginata in his hands, slowly flipping it around and drove the pointed end into his own throat. Close your heart to their suffering. The girl watched with an unreadable expression on her face as he came to and choked on his own blood, desperately grasping at his neck before he crumpled to the ground. Standing still for a few seconds, she walked over to the corpse and kneeled down next to it, closing his eyelids regretfully. Che, I get the shorty. The thug complained, though the cruel grin on his face showed that he was not at all upset about it. Raising his mace, he let out a cry and charged forward. Wind style. Soaring fist. Clenching his fist, Naruto thrust it forward and let a compact ball of air fly from his hand. The shot impacted into the thug's stomach, who cried out in surprise and was knocked onto his butt, his mace clattering on the ground behind him. The whiskered boy pulled out his tanto from its sheath and flashed forward through the use of a shunshin. His face, that's what drew his attention the most. Twisted in pain, forever stuck in this expression of horror. Something white poking out of his pocket drew his attention. He reached inside and pulled out a small slip of paper. It was a photograph. That same man, grinning broadly as a small girl hung off his arm. They both looked so happy. This man was a father. What would this girl think when he wouldn't be coming home? The tip of his blade stopped short a centimeter from the man's forehead, and the thug fell back in surprise as he crawled away a few paces. Did this guy have friends? Did this guy have a family? Who was he to take him away from them? Who was he to decide who lived and who died? The thug trembled in fear as the blonde slowly walked towards him. Getting onto his knees, he clasped his hands together as tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. Please. I was just following orders. Please spare me. Was he really expected to kill someone begging for their life? Were shinobi truly so rotten? Naruto remained still, indecision swimming in his eyes. Looking upon the terrified man's face, he let his blade hang limply in his hand. What's your name? The thug looked confused but quickly answered. Oh, Onugara. Naruto frowned, debating on his next course of action. What should he do? If I let you go, Onugara perked up at that, hope shining on his face. Do you promise to live honestly? And to not kill or pillage anymore? Why yes, I promise. I swear it on my life. The blonde sheathed his tanto and began walking back to his team. Then get out of here before I change my mind. Onugara scrambled to his feet and ran to the exit as if the devil was on his tail. The three genin met back near the center of the base. When they arrived, they saw Tomoda looking none the worse for wear and Tanjo on the ground with a stab wound on his neck. The fire user turned towards his students upon hearing their footsteps and smiled at them. How are you all feeling? His team remained silent, as was expected. He didn't really count on them being right as rain after doing the deeds. Honestly, he had been the same when his teacher made him go through the same thing. He could have handled all the bandits by himself with no problem and shield them from doing this, but he couldn't do that. It was a necessity that had to happen, and he wanted his students to go through it as early as possible. And they had. All save for his youngest. Naruto. Naruto turned his head towards him in acknowledgement, though he couldn't bring himself to look him in the eyes. You let your enemy go. The blonde nodded. Why? The boy nervously chewed on his lip. I couldn't. He looked down and stared at the ground. He was begging for mercy. He's still a human being, sensei. And he promised to become a good person. Promises are hollow. Shot back Tomoda in a stern voice, making the blonde wince. His life was on the line. He would have promised anything. What stops him from continuing his life as a criminal? What stops him from continuing to steal and murder? We're shinobi. We steal. We cheat. We lie. We murder. How are we any different? Tomoda frowned at his words. How can you say something like that? He shook his head in disappointment as his teammates watched on helplessly. We live in a monarchy. We do all of those things to protect the people and the village we love. It's necessary. We get our hands dirty so that the ones back at home remain clean. These people, they fight for themselves. Tomoda turned his back on him. The sooner you learn that, the better. The sooner you learn that, the better. Kakashi had said those words to him before. Well, dog had. Why did the world have to be so damn complicated? Let's get going. He began to walk away and his students quickly caught up to him. We have a long way back home and we won't make it back before nightfall. We will have to stop by Tanaka village and check in an inn on the way there. Thank God. None of the genin wanted to camp out tonight. Bang bang bang. Show. Hurry up with the damn shower. Tomoda nervously peeked over his newspaper as the sole female member of Team 5 banged onto the bathroom door in a fit of anger. Naruto just kept nibbling at his sandwich, doing his best attempt to ignore the happenings a few meters away. I swear if you don't come out in the next 2 minutes then I'm busting that door down. Is that really necessary? Complained Sho from inside the bathroom. Man, women are scary. What was that, sensei? Nothing. Well, I'm heading out. Gonna look around the area a bit. The hotel they'd rented out was fairly small, strictly serving to let them spend the night within a safe environment. The room comprised of 2 single beds and 2 futons, with a small sofa next to window. Attached to it was the tiniest kitchen you've ever seen, and a bathroom with no bathtub, much to Yuna's secret displeasure. The 3 kids had showered after today's event and were now all hanging out in their own way. Yuna was on the sofa, reading a thick-looking book. Sho was next to his futon on the floor and was doing his push-ups, and Naruto was just lying on his bed, his hands behind his head and staring up at the ceiling. All 3 genin looked up at their sensei from their position in the bedroom living room. Naruto raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. Okay, sensei. As Tomoda walked out of the inn, Naruto turned towards the other male member of his team. Hey Sho, I've been meaning to ask you. The Earth user had finished his sets a few minutes ago and was now taking small sips from his water bottle. What is it? You know that weird Earth technique you use. The one that makes you tougher. The boy looked away at that, and Yuna glanced up from her book at the sudden choice of topic. I've never seen anything like that before. Where'd you learn that? Sho didn't reply for a while, making the blonde frown and awkwardly scratch the back of his head. It's okay if you don't want to tell me, I was just see you. No, it's fine. We're teammates, so I should tell you. Naruto watched as his friend closed his eyes and took a deep breath, almost as if to mentally prepare himself. He'd never seen him like that before. Whatever it was probably something pretty big. I learned it from my father. Sho opened his eyes and stared up at the ceiling. My father was obsessed with this man called Kakuzu. So much so that he devoted his entire life to learn all about him. Kakuzu was supposedly alive during the time of the Showtime. He fought the first Hokage and actually survived. That alone granted him the stature of S rank. And my father, he was fascinated by his immortality. Immortality? Is that even possible? Sho turned towards Yuna and shrugged. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. I was never interested in that type of stuff, so I didn't listen much. The only thing I remember is that he had a special power that let him stay alive. He took another breath. Anyway, my father would always look into info about Kakuzu. He knew everything about him. What techniques he used, what he did on a day-to-day basis, hell he even knew what type of food he preferred. But if there was one thing that everybody knew about him, it was his lust for money. Naruto shared an apprehensive look with Yuna. Why did he have a feeling that this story didn't have a happy ending? Kakuzu would always take the highest bounties. And so, to be able to one day meet him, he began to commit crimes across the nations in an attempt to get a high price on his head. It almost felt like his humanity was leaving him. To him, there was only his goal. Sho raised his hand and thoughtfully stared at the tanned complexity of his skin. I hail from Tokigakure. Though when father began his descent into madness, mother took me with her and ran from the village. I was 6 at the time, and patrolling Konoha shinobi eventually found us. 2 years later, father showed up again. He'd disguised himself as a merchant and somehow infiltrated the village and tracked us, me, down. He managed to copy one of the jutsu that Kakuzu used. Kakuzu is an expert when it comes to each element. He's even created his own destructive techniques. Though, his deadliest ability is the earth one which he uses to steal people's hearts. Naruto blanched and unconsciously pulled the blanket further up his body. I've never heard of such a thing. What's it called? Questioned Yuna from her spot. Sho shook his head in return. I don't remember. Kakuzu had a second earth technique, the iron skin. The boy saw recognition on his teammates' faces and nodded in affirmation. You already know what that does. Father figured out the mechanics behind that jutsu, but he had pretty pathetic chakra reserves, so he couldn't use it. I, on the other hand, was given my mother's reserves. He is an earth user, but he couldn't use that jutsu. So, he taught it to me. And used me as a guinea pig to find the weaknesses of the move. Eventually, when he'd learned enough, he brought me with him on a trip. I didn't know where we were going at the time, but it became clear after a few weeks. Kakuzu had found us. He was after my father's bounty. Father didn't stand a chance. He did manage to surprise him and stab him in the heart, but Kakuzu didn't even seem bothered by it. And then, prodded Yuna. And then, father was ripped apart piece by piece, and those things swallowed his heart. After that, all was quiet within the small room. What could they possibly say to this story? That they were sorry. How did you survive? Yuna asked suddenly. If he's so strong, how are you still here? Sho stared down at his lap. I don't think he even noticed me there. It's like it wasn't worth his time to even look at me. He clenched his fists tightly and shook his head. I don't care about revenge. I just want to be able to forget him. But I can't, he's always there whenever I close my eyes. It was strange to see Sho look so vulnerable. He'd always been so level-headed, in control of his emotions. But Naruto knew from experience that he wasn't looking for someone to pity him. Thanks for telling us, Sho. The blonde said. I know it must have not been easy. The earth user just shrugged and brought his bottle up for more water. What about you guys? What's your deal? The question startled the two. Sho never asked those types of question. How surprising. Turns out opening up to people made you feel more comfortable around them. Not much to me, honestly. The girl muttered as she flipped a page of her book. My mother died as a shinobi after I was born. I still see my father sometimes, but pretty rarely. Now I live with my aunt. Naruto sent her an inquisitive look. Wait, why isn't your dad taking care of you? Because he's a coward, she replied bluntly, making the Jinchuriki wince. What about you, Fishcake? Me. My father is the fourth Hokage. My mother is a member of a dead clan. My godfather is one of the legendary Sannin, and I hold the strongest tailed beast inside of my stomach, yet I still somehow lived by myself for 9 years. Ah. Nothing of interest. Jiraiya-kun, what a pleasant surprise. And I see you still haven't learned how to use doors. The Toad Sannin gave his teacher a grin as he closed the window behind him. Doors are outdated, sensei. And that secretary of yours is too much of a hassle. This is much easier. Hiruzen sighed and shook his head. To what do I owe the pleasure, dear student of mine? Jiraiya sprawled himself on a chair opposite to his teacher's desk, a leg casually over the armrest and his arms crossed across his chest. You wouldn't believe the trip I've had. I'm telling you, traveling from Mizu to here is a hell of a trip. I'd thought you would have ridden on top of one those summons of yours. Yeah, and my legs are killing me. The Sandaime deadpanned at the Sannin and diverted his attention back to his paperwork. They'd been through this song and dance too many times before. If Jiraiya didn't want to talk yet, then nothing would make him talk. He'd talk when he was ready. I saw Minato's brat on my way here. Well, that was certainly worth his attention. You saw Naruto-kun. Did you speak with him? A rare frown was present on the Sannin's face. Nah, he didn't see me. But I did see a headband on his forehead. A bit young, don't you think? What is he, 10? 9. Corrected the aged Kage. And graduated when he was 8. Jiraiya's frown deepened. Now don't look at me like that, it was his wish. Kakashi has taken him under his wing for the past few years, and we've quickly concluded that Naruto-kun is a prodigy, much like how his father was at his age. And not only that, but he also seems to possess Kushina's unique ability. The hermit's eyebrows raised in surprise. The chains. That's a surprise. He rubbed his chin in thought, and the room soon descended into silence once more. Though it was short-lived, because Jiraiya's next words would shake the old man to his core. Orochimaru left the Akatsuki. Did you hear that? Hear what? Tomoda brought a finger to his lips and motioned for them to stay put. They had left Tanaka village about half an hour ago and would soon be stepping foot within Konoha territory. Slowly stalking forward, the fire user kept his guard up and disappeared from the Genin's line of view through the bushes. His eyes snapped to the ground, noticing something long slithering there. A vine. No, more like. Oh, it's just a snake. Where the hell was he? A bead of sweat trailed down his temple in nervousness as he and his team remained on guard, warily looking around for potential danger. Shouldn't Sensei be back by now? Whispered Naruto to his teammates. Sho frowned and tightened his grip around his kunai. I'm not liking this. Let's go check it out. The trio moved forward and cautiously followed after their sensei, stepping through the shrubbery and vines. Sensei. The blonde heard his female teammate yell out in panic and run on ahead, though he didn't know why from his position. He was at the back of the line. But it soon became clear once he'd caught up. Tomoda was on the ground. What? Naruto quickly joined his teammates as they gathered around their sensei, and Sho placed his finger against Tomoda's neck, eyes wide and tanned skin an unhealthy pale color. There's no pulse. Checking the body over, the only thing he could see out of place were 2 puncture wounds on the nape of his neck. Cuckoo, what do we have here? Sakura. Honey, you're gonna be late for the academy. Coming, Mom. She'd been standing in front of the mirror for nearly 10 minutes by now, trying in vain to arrange her long pink hair into neat bangs. Huffing in frustration, she gave up halfway and pushed them to the side, using a green clip to keep it out of her eyes. Quickly glancing at her clock, she calculated that she had about 10 more minutes before class started. Opening her door and rushing downstairs, she waved to her parents and hurried outside, where her friend and rival was waiting for her, arms crossed and left foot impatiently tapping onto the ground. About time, forehead. Did you have trouble fitting your huge head through your dress? Shut it, Ino pig. She yelled back and walked faster in an attempt to get rid of her. Unfortunately, she easily caught up with a teasing smirk on her face. Did you see where Sasuke-kun was sitting yesterday? He was next to me. After all these years he's finally starting to notice me. Yes, Ino, you told me this 10 times already yesterday. And the only reason he sat next to you was because it was the only seat left. HMPH, you're just jealous. Sakura growled, a tick mark appearing above her brow. Jealous of what? Your pig nose. The two girls butted heads as sparks flew between their eyes. They glared at each other for a few more seconds before separating and began walking side by side at a normal pace. Have you studied for the test today? Ino asked her friend, who grinned at her in response. Of course, I'm gonna ace it and you'll be left in my dust once again. Grr. Y U. O. Die. R. Court. D. N. Street. G. E. I. Where was he? Il C. N. T. R. D. Ever. A. M. T. T. H. R. E. P. R. N. G. S. He felt tired, so weak and tired. C. U. R. N. T. Say. L. W. O. T. B. Sue. F. I. N. T. Couldn't he just go back to sleep? The real world was just so tiring. And he was having such a pleasant dream. T. At his UNF. N. Te. N. W. V. A. Re. Ons W. L. Nay. To be X. L. Red. Why was the real world so loud? His B. Ain Act. V. Tiazun. Su. L. Ao Con. Idering his Santa. S. It is N. T. That O. T. F. The or. In. Rai. All the noise around him was getting louder, and as he began to feel himself becoming more and more aware, the noise became more and more clear. What do you mean by unusual? Take the chemical imbalance within his brain for instance. His dopamine and serotonin output are very low, but his cortisol levels are highly persistent, suggesting a stressful and unhappy life. It's a quite common behavior within Jinchurikis. Kukuku. Interesting. This might make things much easier. The two other occupants of the room turned their attention towards him, and Naruto attempted to open his eyes to view his surroundings, but his vision was too blurry and woozy to be able to perceive anything. Finally awake, Naruto-kun. A sickly voice said a few paces away from him. Slow, measured steps could be heard approaching, echoing, growing closer and closer until it stopped right beside him. Struggling to open his eyes once more, he could hazily discern long silky black hair and pale skin. A rush of jumbled memories suddenly came back to him. He'd seen that man before. Where was his team? There's no pulse. Tomoda-sensei is dead. Kukukuku, what do we have here? This man had killed him. Crap. Snap out of it. He could barely remember what had happened after that. Naruto, grab my hand. Hurry. What had this man done to his team? You irritating little pests. Was his team dead as well? No, he couldn't accept that. Kyuubi, help me. He received no reply, but the familiar burning rush of the Nine Tails chakra began to course through his pathways. His brain signals are going haywire again. The creepy guy smirked and watched the bound struggling blonde. There's nothing to fear. His eyes turned slitted and red and his whisker marks thickened. But before anything else could happen, seals scribbled all over his torso began to glow blue and forced the vile chakra back into the seal, making him scream in agony. It hurt. It hurt like nothing he'd ever felt before. It hurt more than Kakashi's training sessions. It hurt more than Kyuubi's chakra. It hurt more than anything he thought could be possible. Where was his team? Where was old man Hokage? Where was Kakashi? Hush now. Naruto-kun, everything is alright. The man chuckled again and leaned over to inspect the seals on his stomach. Somebody help me. Chapter 11. Trapped. Do you know who I am, Naruto-kun? Two sets of cruel eyes stared down at him, each wearing the grin of the devil. The man with the glasses seemed to be the least threatening among the two, though even he held an unsettling aura that made his instincts scream at him to run away. Not like he could run even if he wanted to, there was nothing he could do about it now. He was trapped. Despite that, he chose to show his defiance by remaining silent. His pride was still hurt after he and his team's humiliating defeat. Kukukuku. The pale man chuckled gleefully, a dark frightening melody that terrified him to his very core. He and his team had fought this man. They'd given it everything they had. And still, he'd been toying with them the whole time like he wasn't even trying. Do you know why you're here? The blonde stared back at the man, face set in an angry frown. There was no way he would show weakness to someone like him, and there was no way he would play along with his games. He could see what the Sannin was doing. That man already knew the answer to all of those questions. You are here, because you are special. He answered for him. Smirking down at the seal drawn onto the center of the boy's stomach, he continued. Such beautiful craftsmanship. Truly a work of art. He placed a cold fingertip against the black lines and traced along them in fascination, making the Jinchuriki wince. The Shinigami is quite the mysterious being, wouldn't you agree? What are you talking about? Orochimaru removed his finger and walked over to a table nearby, his assistant scribbling down notes throughout the exchange. An entity that deals with souls. He's been around since the dawn of time and is considered godlike from every angle. He stopped at the table and picked up a small stack of tattered papers. But you already know all about this, don't you, Naruto-kun? Naruto's eye widened when he realized what the snake man was holding. Those were the pages from the book that he'd ripped out, the ones containing what little instructions remained. He'd been keeping them in his tool pouch for safekeeping. I see you've been doing your own little research, how adorable. The man chuckled again and leaned against the desk, eyes casually trailing along the pages. And I'd be willing to bet that you desperately wonder where the rest of this oh so crucial information is. Blue eyes narrowed rebelliously at the accusation. It was true. He'd spent many a night pondering where it could have possibly gone, but there was no way he was going to tell this guy anything. Orochimaru smirked at the child's attempt at silent rebellion. Kabuto, he said shortly. The bespectacled man next to him nodded. As you wish, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru's gaze never left the Jinchuriki even as his assistant left the room to carry out the unsaid task. How has your life been within Konoha, Naruto-kun? Naruto's eyes widened slightly, but refused to meet the man's. Quote. The populace of that pitiful village have always been so foolishly narrow-minded. It was the same when I was there. People labeled me for my looks, and rumors even began to come up about my precious little student once I took her under my wing. It is truly an unforgiving community. Naruto's eyes remained stuck to the ceiling, though he couldn't help but carefully listen to each word being spoken. That case was true for the previous Jinchuriki as well. While not many knew of her identity, the ones in the know who weren't close to her treated her with scorn and contempt. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, am I wrong? Quote. Orochimaru smirked at the blonde's silence. Though he wasn't being very talkative, one could clearly see his internal struggle that was being displayed on his face. And I'm willing to bet that the case is no different for your situation. Everywhere you walk, people whisper. They give you the cold shoulder, or deny your very existence. Quote. It's suffocating. It's like being stuck in a nightmare that you cannot escape from. You try, and you try to prove yourself, to prove to them that you are worth something, that you are not the monster that they think you are. Dark thoughts plague your mind. Would they care if I were gone? Would it make them happy? What did I do wrong? Is my existence really just a mistake? The blonde squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head to the side in defiance. The snake's words were beginning to hurt. He was right, he had asked himself this many times in the past. But now. And eventually, you begin contemplating things that your innocent mind would never have previously considered. No. Kuku. The snake Sanin chuckled in amusement. There is no need to lie to me, Naruto-kun. Naruto ground his teeth together in frustration and began to struggle against his thick leathery bindings once more. I can give you those answers you seek. I can give you the life you've always wanted, a life outside those village walls, a life without scorn. I can give you a purpose to live. His struggles ceased at that, too taken aback by the proclamation. How was such a thing possible? Join me, Naruto-kun. Become my underling, and together, we can make that village pay for all that it's done to you, to us. I can give your life true meaning. You will be accepted. You will be loved by your peers. He walked forward so that the blonde could see him and extended his hand towards him in a show of trust. He suddenly felt his bindings slacken and fall before slithering away into the darkness, revealing them to be nothing more than snakes. What do you say, Naruto-kun? Will you join my cause? The blonde stared at the outstretched hand with fuzzy confusion. A new life. That did sound nice. If there was any truth in the snake charmer's words, then he would never feel lonely again. He would never have to wake up in the morning, paranoid that he would be all by himself once more. He would have a reason to get up, and he'd go to bed at night feeling happy instead of being filled with anguish. He could see his own hand extend forward against his own will to meet with the snake's own pale hand. But maybe he didn't have to fight it. Maybe this was the right choice. Maybe this was where he belonged. Happy birthday, Naruto. His hand froze in midair as a memory jolted his mind back to reality. No, this was wrong. This was all wrong. Sho's shaking hands darkened in color and the boy rushed at his enemy once more. Winding his arm back, he delivered the strongest punch he could muster at the man's cheek, forcing his head to tilt to the side. What? Sho muttered in surprise. The pale man barely looked fazed. Even worse, his eyes were now angry and irritated and no longer held any playfulness. That technique, I do not care for it at all. The Sannin grabbed onto the boy's arm and easily snapped it in half with a twist of his hand. Sho's scream of pain sent chills down the spine of his teammates. This man was evil. He was lying to him. Again, with the lies. He had toyed with him and his teammates for his own amusement. There was no way that the monster in front of him could have any good intentions in his heart. Go to hell. Orochimaru remained silent for a few dreadful moments, but a smile slowly found its way upon his features, and that cold sinister chuckle echoed within the room once more. Oh well. It was worth a try. Before Naruto could react, the snakes from before shot back out of the darkness and tied around his wrists again, leaving him in the same previous predicament. It would have been much easier, but such is the way of life. Although his words seemed remorseful, the smile on his face showed him that he wasn't really bothered by it. The door opened again and in walked Kabuto carrying an item that he couldn't quite make out because of the poor lighting. The bespectacled man handed the object to his master, who proceeded to walk forward into the light. It was a white mask of a demon set in an ugly smile with two big horns coming out of its head. He felt his blood grow cold as realization set in. Orochimaru had the Reaper mask. I've had this for quite a while, Naruto-kun. The Sannin said gleefully, enjoying the look of shock on the boy's face. I took it along with the rest of the notes once I left the village. It's a shame that you refused my offer, he said as he placed the mask down on one of the tables within the room. Naruto swallowed thickly as the man walked up to him again and sat on the chair next to the operation table that Naruto had been lying on. I apologize, I still haven't explained why you are here. You see, I used to be part of an organization that was, well, let's say that they are not the friendliest of people. In fact, they are after people that are just like you, he said, surprising the blonde. And I'm still not quite sure what they plan on doing with them. This is where you come in. I want to see what makes your kind tick. A cold shiver ran down Naruto's spine at that. What was that man going to do to him? And more importantly, why was a group after the Jinchurikis? Were they after the Biju within? A group with such ambitions had to be extremely powerful. Would he have to be on the lookout for them if he made it out of here alive? Well then, we've wasted enough time. Let us begin. Naruto looked up as the man in front of him made a one-handed hand sign, and soon after, his eyelids became heavier and heavier, until all he saw was darkness. What did you do to our sensei? Naruto, calm down. The blonde grit his teeth in frustration and balled his hands into fists, barely registering the words of his female teammate. Kukukuku. And what are three helpless little genin doing out here all by themselves? An intense pressure crashed down onto the three younglings, making them freeze up in shock. Cold sweat broke out on the blonde's forehead as he gulped nervously, but managed to take a slow calming breath. Wow, who knew being subjected to Kyuubi's ill intent would actually help him out in the long run? He glanced over to his teammates besides him and coughed slightly under the weight. Crap, snap out of it, guys. Kukukuku. The man in front of him chuckled once more, much to his displeasure, and fixed his predatory eyes upon the trio. This is Orochimaru. Missing Nin from Konoha, one of the three Sannin. Yuna said in a shaky voice. Did you just say a Sannin? Sho looked over to her with incredulity. It doesn't matter who he is. He killed Sensei. I'm gonna make him regret it. Naruto, you need to think rationally right now. Yuna yelled back at the blonde. We can't take this guy on. We need to get out of here. Naruto's angry eyes snapped towards Yuna with a ferocity that she had never seen before. You're just gonna run away. How long are you planning on bickering between yourselves? The pale man said in a mirthful tone. It's quite rude to ignore your guest, you know. Yuna's shaking increased as she took a step back in fear. What should we do? The oldest of the team looked over at the new arrival and balled his hand into a fist. There's no way we could outrun him even if we tried. Our only option is to fight. The three children looked at each other, uncertainty clear in their eyes. But after a moment, the three nodded in determination. They weren't going down without a fight. Yuna placed her hands into the ram seal as Sho and Naruto shot forward from their position beside her. A small wave of dizziness hit the snake Sanin but was easily shrugged off and cancelled within a split second. He casually leaned away from Sho's punch and redirected Naruto away with a wave of his arm. Damn it, it's not over yet. The blonde thought as a clone appeared next to him. Both took their swords out and began hacking and slashing at the human snake. How droll. Orochimaru thought distastefully as he expertly weaved in between the slashes, his body contorting out of the reach of the sharp edges. Sho came from above with an axe kick, his heel smashing into the top of the man's head, but before they could mentally celebrate, the body they'd struck turned into a brown color and dissolved into dirt. Damn it. Naruto and Sho remained back to each other, fully alert and eyes scanning the area around them. Yuna landed besides the three of them, her brow furrowed in a mixture of worry and frustration. Anyone see him? The girl asked as she kept her hands clasped in the horse seal, though the only reply she received was a shake of their head. Keep your eyes open. The trio remained silent for a moment with bated breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. The silence and the anticipation was becoming suffocating to them. Naruto's ear twitched as they picked up a faint, low rumbling in the distance. What's that noise? His teammates frowned and focused their hearing. Naruto was right, there was sound becoming steadily louder and louder. That sounds like, Yuna muttered in uncertainty. Though her eyes widened as birds desperately flew away and trees began to topple down in the distance. Run! Naruto yelped when Sho grabbed onto his collar and hightailed it out of the small clearing, just as a serpent's giant maw burst through the trees in an attempt to devour them. Yet another failed prototype. Orochimaru shook his head in disappointment as the cursed seal that he had placed near the boy's shoulder faded away once more. Jinchuriki really were quite tiresome. His seal worked in such a way that his impure chakra would taint the recipient's own, and inject a type of addicting enzyme that would force them to use more and more, and thus give him a greater control over them. But the boy's tenant seemed adamant to immediately flush out the putrid chakra and eat the seal away. The worst part was, he couldn't even add a fragment of his soul inside the seal, a key factor that went into making it nigh unbreakable, but the risks were just too great. Who knew what could happen if he attempted to place a part of himself within the same person that contained the mightiest of the Biju? Naruto panted in exhaustion as Kyuubi forcefully expelled the vile chakra. This has been a constant for the past 2 days. He'd pass out, and be woken up a bit later as the snake man attempted to brand him with his curse mark, though all that was for naught as none of them even seemed to work. After each failed experiment, he would be forced back into a deep slumber until the next one. The process was very similar to how a human would catch a cold. A virus would try to infiltrate the host's body, and the antibodies would fight it. People seemed to misinterpret a cold as the virus's doing, but it was actually their own body's attempt to flush it out that caused the fevers and the sickness. Those were necessary to make an inhospitable environment for the virus. Much like how the antibodies fought the virus, Kyuubi's chakra fought the Sanin's chakra, resulting in the immense pain that he was constantly feeling hours after hours. Sore muscles, high fever, violent shaking, strong bouts of sickness, all so similar to a regular cold, yet so much worse. Kabuto, we are going to have to take more drastic measures. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. Before the blonde could hear any more, his hearing began to grow fuzzy and his eyelids were forced shut. Smoke coming from a wooden pipe gently wafted through the air as the Sandame's heavy frown deepened even further while he listened to his subordinate's debriefing of the new situation. Once again, it seemed that the mistakes of his past seemed to be coming back to haunt him. We've received confirmation from Disanasu that Team 5 has checked in at Hacho village. The trail led us to a bandit camp that had already been cleared out, and we managed to track it to an inn. From there, they followed a simple trail back towards the borders of the Land of Fire. However, it ended prematurely 30 kilometers northeast of the village. And you're sure that it just disappeared? The Chunin turned towards the toad sage that had been pacing back and forth this whole time, listening to his debriefing along with his leader. Yes, sir. It just seemed to vanish into thin air. There were clear signs of a battle, along with a heavy reptilian scent. The body of Jonin Wada Tomoda has been recovered a few paces away from the battle site. Silence prevailed within the office as the two elders digested that information. Hiruzen nodded towards the Inuzuka and gave a wave of his hand to signal his hidden Anbu. You may all leave. Once the room was cleared, the Sannin turned towards the third, an angry look on his face. This is absurd. How could you have let him out of the village so early? Hiruzen sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. Believe me, Jiraiya, You what? Sensei. Jiraiya slammed his hands on the mahogany table. You throw him in an orphanage. You let him live on the street for months. You make him live alone. Jiraiya paced around the room once again. You allow him to become a ninja when he's clearly too young. You give him a sensei that isn't even strong enough to protect him. He faced the old man and leveled furious eyes upon him. And now, Orochimaru, another one of your mistakes managed to get his hands on him, and who knows what he's doing to him. You are spitting on Minato's memory. Hiruzen stood up from his chair as the pressure within the room increased. How dare you? The two glared at each other for a few more moments before Hiruzen sighed and sat back down on his chair. Now is not the time for this, Jiraiya. If it is indeed Orochimaru, then we must proceed with haste. Jiraiya scoffed and turned towards the door. I'm going to the fighting site. And I hope you get your act together. For once, stop acting like a hokage, and start acting like a human being. He said before slamming the door shut. Hiruzen sighed tiredly and sifted through his paperwork to make the preparations. It barely took him a minute to arrive near the village gates, where he flashed through hand signs and summoned a big purple toad wielding a shield and a Susumata. Ah, Jiraiya, to what do I owe the pleasure? Gameken, I need you to take me 30 kilometers northeast of here, full speed. Ah, I will do my best. Though forgive me, I am quite clumsy. Jiraiya-sama. The toad hermit turned to see a masked Jonin land besides him. Huh, is that you, Kakashi? What do you want? I'm in a hurry. I know where you're headed. I heard the report from a Jonin near the tower. Please, let me come with you. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow but shook his head. No, you'll only be in the way. Kakashi clenched his fist in frustration before slowly lowering himself onto his knees and placing his hands out in front of him, much to the Sannin's shock. Please allow me to join you. I promise you that I will pull my weight. I am among the best when it comes to fighting and tracking. Jiraiya watched the Jonin in front of him with his mouth slightly agape with surprise. He'd always pegged him to be a proud man who would never bow to anyone save for his leader. What the hell's gotten into you? Last time I saw you, you looked about ready to give up on everything. Kakashi remained motionless, forehead still pressed to the ground. Things have changed. Naruto is important to me, and I would let myself die before I let anything happen to him. The hermit's eyebrows creased as Gameken watched on silently. Aren't you going a bit too far with this? When he received no reply, he clicked his tongue and awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck. Tisk, fine, just hurry up and get on. My title can give you clearance to leave the village for now. Kakashi finally raised his head and got back onto his feet, nodding towards the sage in appreciation. You won't regret it. Yeah, whatever. Just hurry it up. 2561, 2562, 2563, 2564, 2565, 2566, 2567. Those numbers. 2569, 2570, 2571, 2572, 2573, 2574, 2575. They seemed to be the only thing keeping him grounded to his humanity. 2578, 2579, 2580, 2581, 2582, 2583, 2584. It's been nearly a week. At least, that's what his internal clock was making him believe. Who knew how long it had actually been? There was no sunlight in this room, nor was there any clocks. There was only the chair that he was tied to and a small table. 2589, 2590, 2591, 2592, 2593, 2594, 2595. Every time he'd wake up, it would be to a new painful experiment. And every day, it seemed they only became worse and worse. And every time, they would fail. 2601, 2602, 2603, 2604, 2605, 2606, 2607. Even though he couldn't feel the fox's connection anymore, it felt like he was still fighting in there. Whatever the snake man was trying to do, Kyuubi wasn't having any of it and was countering everything. Unfortunately, this meant that Naruto's body had to act as the war-torn battlefield. He would then proceed to fall unconscious. This had been his life for the past few days. Wake up, live through the torture, pass out, then wait for the next one. A nasogastric tube had been inserted inside his nose so he wouldn't starve or die of thirst. Then slowly, it had felt like his reality was slowly slipping away. And so, he counted. First he counted the tiles on the floor, then the tiles on the ceiling and walls. And once he'd counted them to the point he couldn't even bear to look at them anymore, he counted in his head. Mostly he'd just count up starting from 0, but sometimes he'd mix it up a bit and count in additions and multiplications. The times where he felt extra adventurous, he'd do the same but in decreasing orders. It was his only salvation. Gah, help me. He squeezed his eyes shut as the woeful echoes of another tortured patient resounded from another room further down the corridor. This was the worst part. Every time he heard another person cry out in pain, he could feel his heart and his sanity break a little more. It was clear that he wasn't the only one subjected to the cruel treatment. Somebody help me. But he could do nothing about it. I'm sorry. Point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Blonde hair popped out from beneath the fallen tree that had nearly squashed him to death, followed by a large intake of air. That was way too close. If Sho hadn't pulled him away in time, he'd probably be snake food by now. He coughed up some dust that had gotten caught in his airways and looked to the side at his two teammates that had already managed to get back to their feet. He shook his head and forced himself into a standing position. Sho's shaking hands darkened in color and the boy rushed at his enemy once more. Winding his arm back, he delivered the strongest punch he could muster at the man's cheek, forcing his head to tilt to the side. What? Sho muttered in surprise. The pale man barely looked fazed. Even worse, his eyes were now angry and irritated and no longer held any playfulness. That technique, I do not care for it at all. The Sannin grabbed onto the boy's arm and easily snapped it in half with a twist of his hand. Sho's scream of pain sent chills down the spine of his teammates. Sho! Yuna yelled in panic as the Sannin carelessly dropped the genin from his spot up on the trees, though he was quickly caught by the girl. Sho groaned at the impact but tried his best to stifle his pain through gritted teeth. Damn it, Naruto growled as frustration began to grow from within his stomach. His eyes turned into slits as he could feel newfound power growing from within. Launching himself forward, he threw a claw swipe at the pale man who brought his arm to block it, but was surprised at the newfound strength behind it. Cuckoo, so you are finally revealing your true colors then, you irritating little pest. It seems this laboratory's location has been compromised. The blonde Jinchuriki twitched slightly at that little piece of knowledge. Kabuto, the man with the glasses turned towards his leader in surprise. How do you mean, my lord? Orochimaru hummed irritably as he began to walk towards the door, his servant falling into step behind him. The scouts have recorded some unusual readings skulking about in the area, and if my feeling is right, then this will prove to be quite troublesome. Continue to ensure that the daily tasks are met with the inmates, I will return shortly. As you wish, Orochimaru-sama. The door slammed shut behind the two, leaving the whiskered boy alone within it once more. Though instead of feeling scared and hopeless like usual, he felt the faintest embers of hope blooming in his chest. Could it be? Could these unusual readings, as he said, be someone coming to his rescue? He found it hard to believe, but a small persistent part of his mind couldn't help but contemplate on that chain of thought. But all that didn't matter. Orochimaru was momentarily leaving the premises. Of course, he'd tried escaping his bonds before, but for some god-forsaken reason, they weren't made of ropes or wire, but were actual thick leathery snakes that refused to budge no matter how much he tried to force himself out of them. How were these things even still alive? It's not like he saw anyone coming around every day to feed them. He'd give up after a few minutes, the hissing of the snakes and the idea of getting caught by that man making him nervous enough to cast the idea out the window for a few days. But today, this was his one chance. He'd only dipped his toes in last time in his attempts at escaping, but now he just no longer had a choice. He needed to escape, and if he didn't now, then he had a feeling that he would never be able to and would remain trapped here for eternity. He once again attempted to pull his hands free from the tight bonds, twisting and tugging them at random in an effort to release them. The snakes behind him hissed in warning, but he decided to ignore them for now. Damn. They weren't budging. The seals on his body had sapped him of his chakra, not to mention his only source of nutrients for the past near 3 weeks have been coming from a tube going up his nose. His frame had become pale and skinnier and rendered him even weaker than normal. But he wasn't about to give up. He refused to give up now. Maybe if he couldn't overpower the snakes, he could force them away in some other way. His hands were tied at a weird angle, over his head and behind his neck, most likely done so that he wouldn't be able to reach them at all. But he had to try. He attempted to lean back and reach the bindings with his mouth, but his body just wouldn't bend that way. He had no choice. The snakes hissed more and threateningly raised their body as he tried to force his head between the space of his shoulder and his wrist. He cringed when he felt the muscles in his arm cramp up in protest at the weird angle, but he pushed on. Harder and harder, he kept pushing his head further in. No, it was no use. The joints of his shoulders were physically stopping him now. He couldn't progress forward anymore. But he was so close. Clack. He bit his lip and stifled his cry of pain when he felt his shoulder joint snap under the pressure as pain flared up all throughout his arm. Just 1 more centimeter and he could reach it. Crack. His deltoid and trapezius ripped, and it took every fibers of his being not to scream out in agony. God, this sucked. But compared to the constant pain he'd been in these past few weeks, he could easily manage this. There. He sunk his teeth into the thick body of the first snake, who hissed loudly and shot forward, its long fangs burying into his cheek and pumping him full with venom. It hurt. God, it hurt like crazy, but he was too far gone to give up. He bit harder and yanked his head to the side, ripping a chunk of its skin off. The snake finally let go of his cheek and fell to the floor, hissing in pain and slithering into the darkness. He did the same to the second snake and bit onto its tail as hard as he could using his molars. The brown snake shrieked and coiled around his neck in retaliation, but with this movement, Naruto could feel the snake's grip around his wrist slacken slightly. That was all he needed. He mustered up all of his strength and yanked his hands free from the loop that made up the snake's body. Frantically feeling around the tray sitting on the table next to him, he grabbed the first thing his hand landed upon and stabbed it deep into the snake's head. The reptile fell dead instantly when the small sharp scissors pierced his brain. Naruto collapsed on the ground, panting madly and ripped the tube out of his nose as he attempted to catch his breath again. But he wasn't looking too good now. Not only had his muscles atrophied from underuse, he now sported a broken shoulder and a cheek full of venom that was quickly spreading to his neck. Kyubi, are you there? He thought weakly as he tried to force himself up. His body was shaking so much, it felt similar to how your arm felt like after it fell asleep for a few minutes, only 10 times worse and all over his body. He propped himself against the bed and looked down at the multitude of seals written across his stomach. He was no expert in seals, but he knew there existed 2 types. The ones that melded with your skin, and the ones that were only active as long as they were still drawn on. The seal that held the 9 tails inside of him disappeared when nothing was causing it to show up, so dragging a line across would do nothing to disrupt it. But those ones that sat on top, he hadn't seen them disappear at all. He could spot a suppressant seal, a restraining seal and a disruption seal among others. He desperately tried to rub his palm against the ink in an effort to rub them off when he felt his mind begin to slip again from the snake's toxins. No, he couldn't go out like that. In a last-ditch attempt, he pulled the scissors out of the snake's body and cut a gash across his own stomach, making a trench across the suppression seal. Red chakra suddenly exploded from his body as the aura of the 9 tails finally came into contact with the outside world after all this time. This was much more powerful than it usually was, thought the blonde in a strange detached manner, so much more potent, so much angrier. It seemed the 9 tails hadn't appreciated being closed off for so long. Before he could even begin to think about fighting for control, He felt the chakra force him into a standing position. His shoulder snapped back into place, the poison was forcefully expelled out of his body and the puncture marks closed, showing unblemished skin underneath. His eyes turned into a deep red with his nails and fangs elongating. Even more strange, his whiskers thickened and his lips turned into an animalistic shade of black. The vicious chakra bubbled up around him and formed into a cloak, forming two long ears sitting on top of his head and two even longer tails angrily waving around behind him. The blonde howled and clutched his head in pain, his sharp nails cutting into the skin from the action. The door suddenly burst open revealing an alarmed-looking Kabuto, though his surprise didn't last for long as twin chakra scalpels appeared on both of his hands. The bespectacled man rushed at the Jinchuriki to incapacitate him, but failed to react in time when the younger boy launched forward faster than he could react and sent a wild claw strike that ripped into the side of his face. A loud boom resounded from the impact as the medic nin was sent flying through several walls, though the crazed blonde paid it no mind and began sprinting through the corridors as a third chakra tail sprouted from his tailbone. He gave a feral snarl when he was ambushed by more people, probably servants of that treacherous snake. It didn't matter to him though, all he could see right now were monsters standing in the way of his freedom. He raised his arm high up in the air as the orange cloak extended and a giant clawed hand crashed down and sent them all flying away. Two more tried to run up behind him, but a gleaming golden chain spearing through their chest stopped them dead in their tracks. Naruto clutched his head in pain once more as his skin was beginning to peel off. He should be stopping this. He needed to stop this, but the gloss of blood was becoming so tantalizing and it was all he could do to not succumb completely to his desires. A fourth tail was beginning to form behind him, and the burning chakra became even more painful, but he forced it back, the new tail retracting into the cloak. He continued his mad dash through the underground maze, now running on his hands and feet like a wild dog. Red eyes glared hatefully at those same walls with the twisty patterns that he had become so accustomed to seeing these past 3 weeks. No more. He was sick of them. Two more giant claws made of chakra materialized behind him and made short work of them. Terrified screams resounded through the corridors as rooms were demolished and prison cells were ripped apart, but he ignored them and kept running to the exit. He had to get out of here, he couldn't stand this place anymore. Any longer and he had a feeling that his sanity would lose him. He crashed through one more wall and finally was able to see the clear blue sky. But something was wrong, he was still surrounded by walls all around him. This wasn't the exit, it looked more like a courtyard. But still, the fresh air and sunlight soothed his mind and snapped him back to reality. Cringing and kneeling on the ground, the noxious red chakra retreated back into his body and left behind a panting whiskered boy. Oh God, reality came crashing down on the poor blonde. He'd killed those people back there. Not only the ones working for Orochimaru, but also the innocent ones that had been caught in the crossfire. The ones that had been imprisoned just like he had been. What did you do, you idiot? He desperately gripped his hair and shook his head in denial, hoping the entire thing would just go away if he willed it hard enough. But alas, the nightmare wasn't gonna go away so easily. Why? Angrily slamming his head against the ground, his screams of frustration cut through the deafening silence of the outside world, the wind being his only witness during this vulnerable moment until all that remained were hopeless sobs of sorrow. Naruto laid on the cold ground for several minutes, panting and sniffling as he mourned the unfortunate souls that had shared his pain. He couldn't stay forever though, as much as he wanted to just lay there and sleep for the rest of his days. The soft wind and sunshine were starting to make his eyelids heavy. I have to get out of here. Slowly pushing himself into a standing position, he clutched his other sleeve and brought his arm closer to his body as a particularly cold gust of wind chilled him to his bones. There was only one way forward, so all he could do now was follow it. He trailed the same path for several more minutes, strangely, but thankfully not running into any more workers. This facility was surprisingly barren for its size, it was strange. A lot of empty rooms everywhere. He remarked idly. He stopped abruptly when the sound of labored breathing and muttering hit his sensitive ears. He turned his attention to another door, though this one didn't seem empty like the rest. He slowly walked towards it and pushed the door open. It looked like a small Spartan bedroom. 4 walls, and a single bed with a light bulb hanging from the ceiling. No desk, no nightstand, no chair, no window. This looked like a prison cell more than anything now that he thought about it. Though what drew his attention was the crouching figure in the middle of the room, with their backs turned to him, making him unable to see who was there. The person was muttering to themselves and had a hand placed firmly on the nape of their neck as if to push away phantom pains. He knew this person. The clothes were a bleak beige color, but that shade of skin, that hair, that voice he could hear coming from them. It was definitely familiar. That's right, it was. Show. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.